it up, Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Milo?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through. It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we will have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You will bring me. Captain Armor, I do not know what strength is like that. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people failed. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
Okay, guys. It's gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be fine. The narrative bylaws, as all prospective co-hosts consent to without needing to sign any contracts. I know my co-host tonight is a big believer in de facto consenting to contracts that he has not seen, heard, nor signed, but that his betters have already perused on his behalf / made up on the spot. And the addendum, you might call it an amendment to the narrative bylaws that most of you are familiar with, is that in the event of technical difficulties wherein the stream becomes another stream that doesn't start until 26 minutes after the hour, does not count as narrative time. So that's what we're going with. and I'm sticking to it. Should be a good show tonight. I don't know what the fuck happened there. It seems like everybody on the back end did their job. I panicked because chat was panicking. The stream wasn't working on Rumble. That is true. It seems you guys were not lying about that. It seems like this was a huge Rumble fuck up, and that neither Brad nor Jess fucked it up, although I reserve the right to heartily blame both if I want to. And anyway, it should be a good stream. You guys should pile in, spread the news, and yeah, before I bring my guest on, let's thank the sponsors tonight, who are both Badlanders, all Badlands sponsors tonight, starting with our friend Jordan Sather, sometimes friend, sometimes frenemy. Maha yourself with supplements that don't suck from Conscious Strength. Founded by Badlands' very own Jordan Sather in 2019, Conscious Strength products are made in America and won't break your bank, unlike other online brands. The lineup includes collagen for strengthening joints and hair, electrolytes to get rid of cramps, greens powders that taste good and mix easy, Shilajit gummies, methylene blue, zeolite, and more. Flip the finger to pharma, be your own doctor, and get supplements that you can trust from Conscious Strength. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/strength to shop now. That's badlandsmedia.tv/strength. And we are also brought to you by a person who seems like she didn't fuck everything up and that it was actually Rumble, but who also has good products that we do use in the Bright household. So even if she did fuck it all up, I'd be willing to support this endeavor. And that is our friend Jessica at All Good. This Christmas, make self-care great again with All Good by Jessica Storm. Imagine indulging in premium organic ingredients crafted with real purpose, no junk, no BS. Each small batch handmade in beautiful sunny Florida that arrives in glass jars. I can confirm that. They are glass jars. All Good inside and out. Try the light and silky whipped tallow. Tame your mane with tamed hair serum and nourishing tallow beard balm. I have the beard balm and haven't used it yet, but I will, and I will report back to you guys on the next episode. Everything else we've used from Jess has been fantastic. Carve out that precious me time this holiday season. Grab those irresistible gift bundles for yourself and everyone on your shopping list. From serums to balms for guys and gals. The gifts that keep on giving. Not sure what to get? All Good has you covered with gift cards for $25 and up. See what all the buzz is about? Head straight to badlandsmedia.tv/allgood. Use the promo code Badlands for a discount and support Badlands Media. That's badlandsmedia.tv/allgood. Promo code Badlands, because self-care just got epic. And as I always say, whether you believe that we have our child's best interests at heart or not, we apply these products to my child at times if we need to. So he's still okay. He seems good. I guess we'll see how he turns out. And then I can report back in about 10 years. All right. I'm going to bring in my guest tonight now that everything is running extremely smoothly. And our guest tonight is somebody who believes very strongly in systems, kind of anti-sovereignty undercurrents to most of what he talks about, really just against decentralization. So I guess a globalist, you could call him, really into big government and all that kind of stuff, and or the opposite of everything that I just said, and that is Jonathan Drake. How's it going, man?
Pretty good now that we're live.
Yeah, what did your heart sink when you were like, I'm already tired, and now we've wasted a half an hour?
No, like I said, I've got an espresso in me, so I think I'm good. I took it as a vote of confidence that the deep state did not want to have this conversation be aired, so you have to look at the bright side.
It kind of feels that way, especially maybe we threw him off. So I named this episode The MAGA Paradox. I never confer with my guest about what I'm going to end up naming the episode, but I do usually talk to them about what I supposedly want to talk to them about. So we did discuss some of that. The MAGA Paradox is an intentional title. I want to try to approach this conversation tonight in a couple of ways. And I want Jonathan to give a little bit of an intro to people on this show who haven't watched his show yet. I'm sure a lot of them have and come right into this show from the No Treason Podcast. But I'd like a little background on that because it'll set us up for our second half tonight. But the reason I named this the MAGA Paradox is because we talk about Donald Trump all the time at Badlands, in the truth community, in the MAGA core, of course. And we talk about the founding fathers, America, the Constitution, the Republic, all those good topics in many different ways. But I think that Donald Trump and the American founding are really fascinating and somewhat paradoxical in ways that we don't always talk about. And I thought you would be a great person to have some of these paradoxical conversations with, or bicameral conversations, because some people are threatened by it. Like, some people in MAGA don't like when you talk about these seeming contradictions in Donald Trump or even in the American founding. But maybe tonight in this conversation, my goal here is that maybe we can explore some of these seeming contradictions and paradoxes at the heart of Donald Trump and at the heart of the American founding in a way that is oddly positive to me. Jonathan might have a different viewpoint on it, but I actually think it's good that Trump is this paradoxical figure. We don't know the founders. We only know what we're told about them. Certainly think some of them had some of this paradoxical nature too. But yeah, I think, anyway, that's kind of the opening take there, but I wonder what you think of that, paradoxes in general, and sort of why you wanted to do the show that you chose to open with on Badlands, in relation to this kind of topic.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, specifically with Trump, I think the paradoxical nature of the way he presents himself is a testament to the nature of the fight that we're in. We'll end up touching on the Boromir paradox later, but by having to straddle both sides, it is telling to me the enemy that we're up against and how big the battle actually is, that it takes someone like him who's willing to base all the slings and arrows and all that to essentially disrupt up on the top end. And I think the ultimate paradox then is that we don't actually have to do what he says. Even though he's fighting for us, we're not actually beholden to his vision. And if it's really true, and I mentioned this on my first episode, if it's really true what he said, that he's giving the power back to us, the people, then we must take it and make it our own and not just do whatever he says, which is why, of course, the unity is the big topic nowadays.
Right.
That's why we need to, we don't have to unify behind Trump. We need to unify behind truth. And clearly we can point to times when he's not using truth. He's using intentional deception, which of course is a paradox in and of itself, because I think he ultimately is fighting for truth.
Right.
But we don't have to do that. We can point at something and objectively, by an objective standard, say that's wrong, and we don't want to go that direction, even though Trump is on one side kind of pushing that way, but then also on the other way, he's setting up the stage for us to do our own thing. So you're wanting like a full 10-week backlog download, or like how much?
No, that's a good intro on Trump specifically, I guess. And we'll mention Lysander Spooner more so in the second half of tonight, but maybe just intro to people of what the No Treason Podcast is in relation to what you just said about Trump. I mean, I think they're kind of related. They're obviously different topics. You're talking about Lysander Spooner, but again, the inspiration tonight was this paradoxical nature of Trump. I think that there's many different ways that he's a paradoxical figure. You just pointed out a couple, so we can get into those. But yeah, just for people, like, what got you really interested in Lysander Spooner specifically, and what's the elevator pitch in terms of him, especially to like the truth community and MAGA audience? Like, why do you think they can get something good and positive out of interacting with Spooner? Because the reason I caveat that is there are some people that, whether they're liberal or conservative, that start going down Spooner rabbit holes and they get kind of black-pilled. I don't actually, and maybe that's unique to me, but I don't see that as a black-pilled rabbit hole. But I wonder why you wanted to do that show, especially in the context of being somebody who's ostensibly a Trump supporter and in this kind of larger community.
So are we talking like local mall elevator pitch or like Empire
Yeah,
State
yeah.
Building elevator pitch?
Strip
'Cause-
mall.
Okay,
Like
strip mall.
like you're driving by a strip mall and somebody has a
The
spinny
parking
sign.
garage. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I first came across Spooner's writing 2009, maybe 2010, somewhere in that range. My older brother is the one who sort of led the charge in my family towards more libertarian ideas. He was already doing that before Ron Paul came onto the scene. We came from like a conservative Christian homeschooled background, but we were aware of the deep state stuff. I mentioned on G's show that I'd seen the documentary Money Masters when I was like 12, which is a 3.5-hour documentary on the history of fractional reserve banking and how the Federal Reserve has completely fucked us over. And I remember being so frustrated by that because it's like, how do these Republicans, of course, Republican everything, how do these Republican congressmen not see this? Like, why aren't they doing anything about it? And it turns out actually they're all in on the scam. But
so then you get into Austrian economics and all that.
Oh yeah,
stuff.
yeah, we were big into that. My older brother, like I said, he led the charge on that. So I was actually in the middle of getting a political science degree, which if you're trying to become a priest of the deep state by getting a political science degree, I don't recommend reading Lysander Spooner in the middle of that. And I realized I'm still going to have a payment, so I may as well get the piece of paper. So I finished, and I was the kind of guy that I would get. The only failing grade I ever got in a paper was I wrote the paper on why the question for the paper was bullshit, and because it was essentially, have you stopped beating your wife yet? Kind of a question. It wasn't. It's like, this is college. We're supposed to be exploring all avenues, and you're pigeonholing us. I talked the guy into a C, so it ended up working out. But,
nice.
But yeah, so I've always come from that sort of question the outside. I grew up homeschooled, and that was in Southern California when it was illegal. So for me, the state has always been a source of danger. It's never been a source of solution. Yeah, in Southern California, it was illegal. And some of my earliest memories of like how I felt was being aware of my parents being concerned that we'd be taken away.
Jesus.
And that my parents are kind of normie in a lot of ways, but they were
that's pretty base though.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, my mom got a degree in education from Purdue University, and in her like classroom sit-in, and starting to work in the educational industry, she realized that was at the time when they were really pushing a lot of progressive classroom stuff. And so she got to see firsthand like what was coming, and she's like, I want nothing to do with this, and then I want my children to have nothing to do with this. So yeah, when it was illegal in Southern California, all of California, they went ahead and made that decision. So I've always existed on the outside, so it's comfortable for me to be the guy standing like, yep, you're all wrong, like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Spooner ties into all that because it essentially provided a logical and even moral and philosophical framework for taking down the narrative of what we're told the founding of our country is supposed to be, and provided the justification for more aggressive stances on liberty, and which I think you can't be a partial libertarian. It's kind of like you're either pregnant or you're not. Because if you take libertarian ideas, and I don't mean the Libertarian Party, because that's fake and gay, but if you take libertarian ideas, you take Ron Paul's ideas and you take them to their logical end, you're going to end up basically where Spooner is. So for me, I as far as doing the show, obviously I've been following Badlands from the beginning. That's and then before the beginning.
So you co-founded it.
I co-founded, indeed. Maybe I could even say I co-founded.
Right.
I might add that caveat to myself. Obviously, a big fan of Chris Paul. Anyone who isn't is probably a retard. And and so I've been active in his chat, pushing Spooner, quotes here and there, and it's forced me to go back and read a lot of his stuff that either I hadn't read or had been a long time since I had read, because you mentioned like being blackpilled. That was 2010 until I discovered Q posts in 2019.
You're gonna get black-pilled in that era, man. So many of us.
Oh yeah.
So many of us, like at Badlands and even in the larger community, but especially in our general age range at Badlands, that window of time, most of us were black-pilling.
Yeah.
Often in completely different directions.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we had dug down deep enough almost to. It's like we dug down deep enough in one rabbit hole or another to sort of catch a glimpse of the system and how expansive the system actually is. I was coming at it as a classical liberal,
right,
and came to that same conclusion. And then, you know, like Brad, Kyle used to talk about going down those rabbit holes as conservatives. And it's funny because you're going to black pill in that era, and it certainly looks like that was the intent of that long-scale humiliation ritual cipher, pincer between the Bush and Obama eras.
Yeah, and you came at it from a classical liberal standpoint. I came at it from, you know, homeschool Christian conservative, which is more conservative than most conservatives could claim to be, probably. But I mentioned on Onlylands the other night that I spent almost 2 years in Africa doing humanitarian aid in my early 20s. And that was formative in really, really waking me up to how the U.S. foreign policy was just utterly despicable and evil. So by mid 2000s, I was already kind of awake to the U.S. foreign policy nonsense and how, you know, the war on terror was bogus and just a power grab. And then I remember telling a lot of my friends who were Tea Party people, it's like, you guys, like, I didn't use the term "you're standing on a rug," but you're standing on a rug.
Right.
And then lo and behold, like 6 months after they get elected, the entirety of them voted to extend the Patriot Act, which is one of the things they campaigned on. And I was like, hello.
That was a huge demoralization that you could see, even as a liberal at the time. You could see that for these new age or old age, I guess you could say, like originalists, kind of, that was super demoralizing for them.
Yeah.
Like you could see even as a liberal, you could see that it's like, oh, there's this new kind of wing of conservatives pushing back against the emergent, or at that time, the dominant neocon agenda. Which was kind of interesting from a liberal perspective, but yeah, that was demoralizing for them in real time. You could see, which might have been the point.
Well, and also could have been a point to find a silver lining in that is, hey, there's a lot of people that feel this way, which Trump was then able to use obviously later on, and we should be able to use now too, that we are obviously the silent majority and all that. But then wrapping up with then the show is that, you know, listening to Badlands, I've been to a couple GARTs, and talking to John, and he's like, man, you should do a podcast. And it's like, I don't have time for a podcast. Like, I'm not looking to be an influencer. You know, I'm not a content creator. Like, this is not me. You know, sitting in my basement office, which I had to clean out. I had a ping pong table in here and boxes and stuff. And it was like, sitting here and talking to myself for an hour is weird. Even when I was doing that, I did my show live last week, and still that was weird because I don't know, it's weird. But I think Spooner's stuff is so important, and obviously, I would post stuff in Chris's chat, and he would, repost it and all that, or I'd make comments at a GART or something. But his stuff is not necessarily hard to read, but it is usually it's pretty dense, and it's not something you just skim through. And so I was like, you know what, I could do like a weekly 15-minute show where I just read a little bit of the essay, and starting with the No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority, number 6 essay. There's 3 of them, 1, 2, and 6. So make sense. But number 6 is kind of the seminal essay, and it was like, I'll just do 15-minute episodes, and I'll just, I'll read a little bit and record it, and I set up my own Rumble channel and everything, and I mentioned to John, I was like, hey, I decided to take your idea. I'm going to go ahead and do a show. He's like, oh, you want to host it on Badlands? I'm like, oh, I didn't even thought about that. Sure, why not? So that's how the show ended up starting out. And then the whole idea was just people need to hear this stuff, because if we are in this golden age, the dawn of the golden age, and if the power has really been given back to us, the people, I don't want to make the same mistake that the pioneers made by bringing the state with them. They escaped the state and they brought it with them. So we want to escape the state. And in order to not bring it with us, we need to understand what it is. And we need to understand the moral guide rails that Spooner offers with natural law, which really is biblical, which we can get into at some point. And that way, when we're deciding what we want our lives to be, we can live according to that, and then we can construct a society according to that. Now, that's the whole purpose of the show. And then 15 minutes has never been even remotely come close to, because then I was like, well, I'll do half an hour. The shortest one I've had now is 37 minutes or 38 minutes. Yeah. I'm usually close to an hour. So, but yeah, so that was the whole like push behind the show. And obviously I'm deeply grateful to John for even putting the idea in my head. And then once I decided to do it, he's like, yeah, come on, Badlands. So,
well, let's not give John a whole lot of credit. No. John's good in terms of that, but I will say that John also recognizes that the strength of Badlands is its diversity. Diversity is our strength. Is the audience is hungry for that kind of conversation, and you can see this. You mentioned at Guards. I don't say it to blow smoke up our audience's ass. They know this. Like, the funny thing is, you can say influencers or whatever, but it's like you go to a Guard, and if you're a speaker or something like that,
you have to say it with vocal fry. It's influencer. That's an
influencer. Yeah. When you're a super successful influencer and you go to a Guard, you're as likely to be approached by a Badlander and, praised for your show or something like that. Or, hey, like, I want to talk to you about this thing you said because it's really awesome and I love that essay you wrote or this rant you went on. You're as likely to get that as you are to get a direct, like, gauntlet thrown challenge on something, except most of the time, of course, there's bad faith people, but the vast majority of the people who are real Badlanders, they'll throw the gauntlet down like as a respectful, almost joyful experience. Like, they're like, hey, you were saying this thing the other night and I wanted to fucking go at you. So could we? It's like, yeah, come step into my office. Let's have a beer. And I think that, kind of hearkening to what you're talking about with Spooner, obviously, for anybody who isn't aware, and this is super broad sales pitch, we'll get more into him again after the Trump section. But essentially, a very well-known thinker, as Jonathan said, and, libertarian, yes, but basically anti-constitutionalist, while, in my view, being somebody that constitutional scholars or people in the MAGA base, people especially in the truth community, should be familiarizing with yourself with, as you just laid out well there, because I actually think that there's a lot of parallels between a lot of, but not all of Trump's rhetoric and a guy like Spooner. I also still think that there's a lot of commonality between some founders and Spooner. And the reason I bring up kind of the paradox even within the Badlands base, which kind of became the theme at our last conference in Florida, the friction, right? Highly frictional kind of became like a mantra within the Badlands team. And I think also within the audience of saying, if, to your point about the awakening, if we're going to kind of grow up and level up at some point and stop just saying like, oh, when the Patriots do this and when the Patriots do that, and start self-actualizing again. And instead of just saying this stuff, instead of just getting on a podcast and saying it, I understand why people push back on that. And they're like, well, you're not doing anything. It's like, well, actually expressing ideas and expressing arguments is the foundation of what the whole American experiment was supposed to be originally. That's where all movements start. And I think it's good that at Badlands, both the hosts, the shows, and the audience are really starting to try to stretch the bounds of what does it mean to be MAGA? What does it mean to be America first? What does it mean to be a Trump supporter? Right? Because there's a wide variance of that. Does that mean you voted for Donald Trump? That's not how I think of it. And then, what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be a sovereign? And sovereign is that word I use the most.
It scares people.
It scares people. And I think they see it as threatening. They see it as, and we've talked unity to death this year. I don't want to necessarily do that, but people do see attempts to redefine what we are or ask questions about what we are in an earnest and very direct manner, as we're trying to do here in the last year in particular. They see that as threatening maybe to the underlying power of the movement that Donald Trump represents, or the Q drops, or however you got into this stuff. And I would push back on that and say that, well, first of all, that probably means that your unity is not built on as strong of a foundation as you think it is. Second, I would argue that it's not threatening to defining what we're supposed to be. It might just be the definition there. And, to kind of loop some of this into the initial topic here, I want to talk about Donald Trump, because in my view, he represents a lot of this paradox. And I want to toss it to you, but I guess to start out, I would just say, look at how Trump came onto the zeitgeist. It's so easy to forget, I feel like. But I've noticed a bit of a trend within MAGA, however you want to define it, in 2025, of trying to harken back to republicanism and conservatism, mainstream ideations of that. Whereas to me, Donald Trump came down the escalator and kind of declared war rhetorically on the political establishment. And a big part of that establishment, as you kind of just pointed out in a fake version of it with the Tea Party, was the Republican establishment and conservatism in the United States. But I wonder what was your first experience with Trump? How did you take him at first, and how did those thoughts evolve?
Yeah, so there's several things in there. The first thing I'll hit on is, you said rhetorically, and I would adapt that to say rhetorically as well. Like, just in the way he talked was a complete departure from the gravitas that we're used to having politics being discussed in. Something else you mentioned about the Badlands audience that I think the experience you describe at Gart is, we're mostly starved for real conversation. And this touches even on trying to go back to the Republican Party. We're pigeonholed into conversations, we're pigeonholed into topics and how we're supposed to talk about them. And I mean, for me, trying to talk to people about Spooner's stuff, and for the last 15 years of my life, you bring it up and people are just kind of like, what? Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But it's not even like, oh, that's really different from what I've heard before. Let me engage with you and try to figure out what you mean. No, it's just, no, you're crazy. That's nuts. You're a conspiracy theorist. And then they just write you off.
Right.
But yeah, as far as Trump and how he entered the scene, and that ties in with what we were talking about with the blackpilling and how that era was so rife with it. And I was not paying attention when I didn't follow the campaign at all. And the only thing that I was aware of was when the whole DNC hack thing happened. And my news source at the time was the LouRockwell.com blog. And there was an article in there or two they would kind of touch on every now and again. They'd be like, well, the CIA has capability of basically doing a hack and making it seem like any, whoever they want
spoofing
did it.
a hack. Right.
So that was just, I mean, I was calling things fake before I realized that it was a good thing to do. So I was like, okay, well, whatever. And to me, the whole thing didn't matter, because with my understanding from Spooner, elections don't matter. From my understanding as a political science degree holder and a, priest of the deep state dropout, I knew that elections were fake. And even just statistically, they're fake. So
yeah,
the whole thing is retarded. So my impression was always, okay, anyone who gets, like me, you might have some earnest person who could sneak into a seat in Congress, like a Ron Paul.
Yeah.
But he has no power.
He becomes the court jester, the libertarian jester.
They called him, he was a doctor, and he was Dr. No, was because he voted no on anything. And one of his standards was, I believe, if it was anything longer than the Constitution, he'd automatically vote no on it. And he had other ways of distilling through what legislation he'd vote on. But my assumption was, especially if you're going to get to the point where you're running in a presidential election, even if you're earnest, like chances are you're already captured, but even if you're earnest, you get sat down on the first day and they go, all right, good job. Nice campaign. You did that was entertaining. Yep. Good job. Okay. You see the guy with the earpiece? Yeah. See, we have his family and he has your family. So you're going to do what we said. So I remember having conversations with people at work about that. And like, well, no, it's real. And like, no, whatever. Like this is objectively the way it has to be. So I still stayed checked out. So I wasn't paying really attention to anything in 2017, 2018, because in my mind and I still kind of feel this way. The pump was primed to track with Chris Paul on Everything Is Fake, because that was kind of because of Spooner, that was my perspective going into, like, I just stopped paying attention to politics.
Yeah.
And of course you're made to feel stupid by not being able to comment on it. And I was like, I don't care. It's dumb. It's not real.
Some even try to make you feel immoral for that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I used to post on my when I had Facebook, which I keep Facebook just to use Marketplace, and that's it.
Yeah.
But and even then they're ruining that. But I would like on election day, I'd be like, I didn't vote, and so can you. Ask me how. Things like that. And people are like, oh, it's your moral duty. Like, actually, you're immoral for doing it, in my opinion. But and then instead of being like, hey, that's an interesting opinion, let's talk about it. No, they just yell at me. I, through Lou Rockwell, heard about the Q posts. And so like in November of 2018, it was like something mentioned in passing. It was like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then a buddy of mine showed me the video of the envelopes at Bush Senior's funeral. And so then January 2019, I started like reading the drops. I didn't like going on the boards. It was too chaotic there. So I'd, go to Q alerts or something like that. And I realized, like, okay, there's something different about Trump, and that he's straddling both sides. He obviously became a Republican, but he's clearly not anything like we've ever seen before. I couldn't believe he's still alive. Like, that was one of the things that shocked me.
That's one of those de facto proofs of a plan, especially as the timeline lengthened, right? Like, maybe at the beginning you're like, is he more controlled oppo? Once it became clear to a lot of us that he was not controlled opposition, then it's one of those low key points, but it's like the fact that Trump has been alive this whole time is one of the more encouraging aspects of power structures behind him in a good way.
Well, and I think the way he approaches any topic, it's so bombastic, and I think that's probably one of his. It should be marked down as one of his greatest legacies, is completely upending the apple cart when it comes to political discourse. Because we've either been taught that, oh, you just don't talk about it, or if you do talk about it, it's got to be within these guardrails, and obviously I don't accept those guardrails. And he doesn't either, but he's still straddling. Like, I would love to get into, like, sit in a skiff with him and be like, okay, dude, here's Spooner.
What do you think?
You have to agree with this because it's unassailable, and be like, yeah, but we have to play the game, which to me, I think the ultimate purpose that he represents is that the enemy that we have is so big and really insurmountable on a timeline that makes any sense, that we need someone to come in as a conqueror, essentially, and just start gutting the establishment, systems, so that we even have the remotest hope of coming, the whole devolution sandwich idea, right?
Yeah.
And so I that's that, and he has to live in that paradox, which bothers me. Once we get into idea, what is truth and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I'd rather him just come out and say it the way it is. That the whole narrative thing just irritates the crap out of me. Just partially because I'm impatient, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's well laid out, and it leads us into why I named this the MAGA paradox, and starting with Donald Trump. I refer to him as the signal setter often. I wrote an article, I think, this year called The Signal Setter. I often call him a cognitive cipher. Chris and I talk about that a lot. And I think there's times and maybe this comes out of the Q community, some within the Q community, not everybody, they use that term signal a lot. And maybe signal gets conflated wrongly with truth, right? They're like, oh, there's signal in this. And if you say something like that, most people in this audience are kind of, they'll key in on something if you're like, oh, there's some signal there. Maybe it's something Trump is talking about. Maybe it's a headline. Maybe it's a deep state headline. Maybe it's even a deep state figure saying something, and we'll be like, there's signal there. When I use the term signal, I am usually not referring to truth or falsity or anything like that. To me, it's like a targeting system. You think of it like a laser targeting system. That can be good. It can be like, hey, this is a first principle buried in this otherwise meandering Trump aside that you should pay attention to. Often, I think with Donald Trump, one of the easiest ways to find signal, I've said this for a few years, I think Donald Trump's asides are signals. They're signal flares. I was, as people saw on the show in 2024, I was overjoyed at his second half of the year interviews with these famous podcasters where he was doing asides about how important his asides are.
I remember that, yeah.
And I think it was in 2023 I had written in the Master series, which is all about how Trump navigates narratives. I had one of the entries in that series is called A Side of Truth. And it was all about how in prepared statements, you're not going to find a lot of signal in the prepared statement that Trump gives. It's on rails, in other words. But when he breaks in with asides, there are these flares of like, here's what I'm talking about, here's what I'm talking about, here's what I'm talking about. And again, it doesn't mean that like, oh, whatever he's saying there is true. But I think most people in this audience believe and agree that Trump is a signal setter. Like he's somebody that the battle space, you kind of mentioned this is the space he's operating in. You know, John often references the Rich Higgins memo, which I think is really foundational to an understanding, to a devil's advocate understanding of what's going on from a narrative perspective. I obviously called the show The Narrative. I'm obsessed with narrative, but I totally understand the frustration that you're getting at. I think this is a show of paradoxes. The paradox I see at the heart of my obsession with narrative is that I recognize that narrative is not real, and yet or does not have to be real, I should say. Narratives, whether they're true or false, are a translation layer resting atop whatever reality is underneath it, right? The narrative is either meant to translate the truth or obfuscate the truth in some way. That's usually the intent behind a narrative. The reason that I ended up becoming obsessed with narrative and really focusing on that above everything else is because ultimately, you know, once you understand that narrative is the reality creation engine of our world, whether it's true or false, you oddly, I think it gets you less frustrated with the narrative tightrope game going back and forth. I get frustrated with it too at times, but yeah. I think it's oddly pragmatic. And I think that's a paradox that Trump embodies, where he's, on the one hand, you mentioned like he's this direct, super direct, apolitical figure who comes in and upends the whole apple cart in terms of how we're supposed to talk about these things. But he does play narrative games all the time, both politically and his own narrative games that are kind of his own thing. But then again, I think that it's a pragmatic approach. Part of it is what you mentioned there, where how big is the enemy, how entrenched is the enemy. But part of it, I think, is a really weird way of defining the enemy, or maybe I shouldn't say enemy, I should say the battle space, is that I've often argued, you know, Rich Higgins argued that the battle space is narrative, and I agree with that, but I would twist that a little bit and change that. Higgins would talk about that, you know, to me, the mechanism through which the battle space is defined is narrative. But I don't think the battle space is narrative. I think the battle space is the mindscape. Yeah. It is this collective belief system. And that, I guess, to pass this back to you, that's why ultimately I think Trump's narrative back and forth, the tightrope he walks, is pragmatic and strategic in that he recognizes that we can want him to say whatever we want him to say, but if he recognizes that the reality is whatever the mindscape is at present, you know, that's what he's calculating his narratives on, right? Like, how is the real world, which is the mindscape, going to react to this narrative? And that if he judges or they judge in their skiff that saying the truth about X, Y, or Z topic is true and is morally defensible,
Right.
but actually has the opposite impact on the reality of the mindscape,
Right.
where does morality come in that? And I don't have an answer to it, but I think that's probably what they're dealing with every fucking day and with every narrative deployment.
Well, first things first, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. That's narrative language. That's John 1. And then in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Bible, you know, as a Christian, I'm going to, you know, that's my lens that I interpret everything through. The Bible is given to us as narrative. So as far as, you know, you talk about the mind being the land, you know, the mindscape is the battle space. The narrative is the language that our minds understand.
Absolutely,
and that's regardless of the spoken language. It's like the language of the soul, because that's the way God created us, which ties into Spooner's whole concept of natural law being the way nature actually is. We're part of nature the way we actually are. I think that because I have to, you know, self-analyze, and that one of the reasons I would suspect that people get irritated by Trump not just coming out and saying, quote unquote, the truth, projecting my own insecurities on other people, is because, you know, you talked earlier about people self-actualizing or growing up. And we are programmed to do what the TV tells us, to believe what the TV tells us, what the person in the lab coat tells us, what the politician gets up and tells us. And I doubt we're ever going to get that from Trump. Because if the goal is awakening, and if the goal is ultimately that truth wins not because someone says so. It's because enough people come to that truth and realize it on their own, and more importantly, have the guts to stand up and say it and live in it. And so I don't think we're, you know, it's cathartic. It would be cathartic if, you know, Fox News and CNN had to come out and be like, yeah, we've been lying to you about vaccines. You know, we've been lying to you about election fraud. But they're never going to do that, because no criminal is ever going to stand up and say, yep, I'm a bad guy. You know, that's one of the ways, you know, you and Chris doing Story Hour. That's one of the ways the movies have lied to us. That's a phrase that I've used a lot in my life. You know, movies have lied to us.
But they've done so honestly, in my opinion.
Yeah. The bad guy never in real life goes on a monologue, gives the hero all the opportunity he needs as he's explaining just how wicked and bad he is. That's not the reality. Instead, the enemy always comes in because the enemy is ultimately a projection of the ultimate enemy, i.e. Satan. They come in as an angel of light. They come in as, you know, as this deceptive friend. You know, did God really say that? Like, oh no, you're not going to lie. He's just jealous. You're going to be like him. Go ahead and eat the fruit. And actually, you are going to die. So, you know, sorry. But so I think that the way that Trump is doing things, and that the way that narrative works, is that people come to it on their own. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing my show, is to kind of help push people into being like, hey, we don't have to follow what Trump is saying, because he's never going to say the thing that you want him to say anyway. So just go ahead and arrive there on your own, set up camp, and start living there in spite of the circumstances. And then to me, that is sort of the paradox. Then what we're dealing with is that you have an enemy that you do need someone like Trump and the military, you know, military being the only way, whatever that actually means. You have to have that side of things, but that won't do anything if we just continue being children about it. Tell us a story, Dad. I mean, that's fun when you're a kid, but eventually you realize like we're living in the story and we need to grow, like you said earlier, grow up. And I'm covering trial by jury now. I've finished the No Treason essay. Now I'm switching into the Spooner's trial by jury essay, which it's 180 some odd pages. So essay is rather generous term. It's more like a book. But the thing that I think scares people about what the trial by jury actually used to be and what it should be is that in fact the arguments against it and the way it has been subverted is, well, there's no certainty of law because basically it can be whatever the jury decides because the jury adjudicates the law as well. But that's people being mature and growing up and realizing that they have a conscience and they can decide in that moment. They are the government in that moment. And I made the comment, the episode that aired tonight, that I recorded last night. So I've been doing my own informational time traveling. That it kind of reveals how we, deep in our hearts, we are statists, because at the end of the day, we kind of just want that authority figure to step in and say,
here's the rules.
Yeah, here are the rules. Here's the story. Here's the truth. And as much as it would be cathartic to hear Trump say that about any number of topics, I don't think he's going to. And we have to come to grips with that and then just live in it in ourselves.
Yeah, that's all well said. And I agree with basically everything you laid out. That's why I'm not even putting an argument forth when I'm saying, referring to Higgins and saying that this is the battle space Trump is operating in. And I think you're not arguing with that either. It's a good baseline to understand what Trump is doing, right? Without the second point that you made there that I fully agree with. And I think we've, at Badlands in particular, started kind of organically moving in this direction. We didn't give ourselves a directive. We weren't given a directive, but it's kind of just happening through this 2025 sifting period where, a lot of the main topics that now the mainstream media is commenting on the very schism type of narratives that we were talking about years ago, going back to 2022, talking about like fake MAGA and all these influencers and everything. And, now that's become a mainstream talking point and kind of a cudgel to hammer the quote unquote movement with. All of which is to say that we need to stop trying to define ourselves maybe as a movement and even getting away from some of that language and remember what the point here is. The trial by jury thing, I guess one little comment on that would be, I suppose another huge Gordian knot that we would need to untangle there is the prerequisite for that working, what you lay out and what Spooner lays out, in my view, would be a moral society. And right now, there is no trust in the fact that we reside within a moral society, the mindscape. Now, I'm not saying I think that is because of the system. I think that's because of everything we're talking about, right? But I think even kind of going back to Trump and the battle space that we're in, the reason that this period, this golden age transition is so difficult, and this sovereign transition, if we want to call it that, is because even a lot of us that might look at an end state and be like, let's say, for example, that's how we start talking about law again, natural law, that sort of thing, is that in some aspects anyway, trial by jury might be one of them, there'd be a lot of people that are otherwise moral people and logical people who could get what you're saying there, who are like, I don't fucking trust my neighbor because of the psyops upon psyops upon psyops that this nation had basically was founded in and has existed in over the last couple hundred years. 12 of those people are going to render a judgment onto me. So it's not even to argue against what Spooner is saying, in my view. It's just to say that I think it's a recognition of the battle space right now where there are people who would take a pragmatic approach of appealing to the rules, even if their moral approach would not want to appeal to the rules because they have no trust in their fellow men, which I don't even blame them for. You know,
Yeah,
we saw this during COVID as a really easy
sure.
example of all of our neighbors betraying us at the drop of a hat. Like those people are going to judge whether or not I keep my kids or something like that.
Well, yeah, and obviously that's a deep topic, and that really gets into what Spooner means by natural law. And I mean, I could probably talk for hours on that. I've mentioned a lot on my show, and I'm actually going to do more in the trial by jury, since the trial by jury depends on that. But his argument is that it is a universal, regardless of culture, across time and space. It is a universal because it's the way. He calls it the science of justice. It's the only way that you can figure out how to live in peace with your fellow man, and you figure that out when you're a kid.
Right.
You know, if you
fairness, you just kind of figure that out. Yeah.
And like, if for you to even learn and understand the word honesty, you already have to understand what honesty is, and you learn that just by the course of growing up. And so that also then a properly functioning trial by jury system seems insurmountable or unattainable in today's world, because we're used to. Well, no one knows how many laws there are. Like, actually, everyone does, really. And it boils down to don't hurt anyone, live honestly, and give everyone their due. That's really what it boils down to. And which you can, as Spooner says, you can sum that up in just by living honestly. Yeah. And so there would probably be a transitional period. And certainly the way that trial by jury is handled now, I've been doing some digging into that, and there's some very specific cases beginning in the 1830s and then going all the way up into the 1970s, I believe. There's like 4 key cases that completely just gutted they've kept the shell, because as I pointed out with the Tina Peters trial, that way they can act as if trial by jury means something. Oh, she was convicted by a jury of her peers. Like, no, she wasn't. She was convicted by the judge who told the jury what to think and what they were allowed to consider and all of that. So all that stuff is a subversion for sure. So I don't know that you could necessarily just sort of drop us all right now and it would be pretty, but I think it would work itself out.
I would agree with that. And I think there's some level, even part of that growing up angle we're both mentioning, there's some level in a, like, how bad do you want the awakening? How bad do you want sovereignty? How much friction in many different ways are you willing to sort of take? And I want to return this to the Trump topic a little bit, because one of the ways we both acknowledge, we talk about this all the time at Badlands, the way Trump communicates can be frustrating, as you said. Sometimes I find it awesome, sometimes I find it frustrating. But when I look for some of that original signal he dropped, Ash mentioned this. I filled in on the Power Hour last night, and Ash was there, and she mentioned Trump, the infamous 2017 inauguration speech that still might remain Trump's best. Certainly one of his best. Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon are widely credited with that. But if you just take the address at face value, to me, that's almost the ground zero to orbit the era of Trump around, is that address, right? Because it's a declaration, which we'll talk about a different declaration a little bit later. But to me, that address comes off as a declaration. It's saying, like, this is what Trumpism is. This is what I'm here for. Right. This is the mission statement. Right. And then
that weren't accidental too, with the military all
absolutely
behind him. Yeah.
And but you're not going to get any argument from Badlanders, right? Whether you're like super rooted in the Q drops, you probably have that reading of it. You're a libertarian, you have that reading of it if you're in this community, of course. A lot of libertarians. The big failing with like mainstream libertarians, which is kind of funny to use that term. But to me, the big failing with them is that they just assume Trump has fallen ass backwards into everything. Like the key assumption that libertarians make is what makes it impossible for them to even get ahead of like normie conservative media of where things are going, because their baseline assumption is that they're smarter than everybody,
Right.
and that Donald Trump is a fucking idiot.
Right.
So
it's so stupid.
Yeah.
Despite such a retarded take, but yeah.
So anyway, my point was on the 2017 declaration there, I think it's an interesting way to frame this conversation about the Trump paradox of saying like, okay, well, if people in this audience understand, as I've been saying for years, Trump speaks bicamerally, he speaks to multiple audiences. Sometimes he zigs, sometimes he zags. His lies or mistruths get excused away as operating in the enemy battle space, including by us. I don't hold myself apart by that. And then when he says something we really like, we're like, that's the truth teller. That's what Donald Trump is. How can I reconcile all of that? To me, I go back to that 2017 inauguration and say, that was the general, the war fighter, sitting at the table to his soldiers, all of us, and saying, this is what I'm here for. This is the mission statement. How we then operate on the battle space might not look like this. Right? Like, that's kind of how I think of it. If you've got a bunch of guys in a skiff, if you've got a bunch of Army Rangers around a planning table, like, they all come up with the directive. They're given the directive. And then there's an understanding, I've talked to Alpha about this. There's an understanding of like triaging and strategy and battlefield tactics, where there's these decision trees that spin out from there once you're on the battlefield and in the battle space. But there's a trust underlying that the other guys in the unit are working toward the same directive, even if you don't really know what they're doing. So to me, I return to that 2017 speech, and Ash said this last night, you said this at the start of the show. What did Donald Trump say his goal was? Returning power to the people, right? Dismantling a corrupt establishment and returning power back to the people. And I guess that is why tonight I thought it'd be interesting to talk to you about him in particular, because I find that it's a bit of a paradox. Trump lays that out as the mission statement, and yet on the surface level, he sort of uses institutional power and centralized power and authority and appeals to authority in a lot of ways over the last decade now. I wonder how you square those two, how you square the mission statement with the battlefield tactics, and if you think that there is still
grab
signal
my
in that
Ranger
original
sword
statement.
for this answer.
Strider, yes. Is that Andriel or is that the original?
That's the Ranger sword.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was too cheap to buy Andriel. I should have bought Andriel, but because I think it's one of the most beautiful swords ever designed.
Oh yeah, Andriel's amazing.
I mean, as an aside, the aesthetics of Lord of the Rings, the movies, I'm not super happy with the way they handle a lot of the story elements, although I mean, still amazing. But the feel,
oh yeah,
and like the tactileness of I've read those books so many times growing up, and when Gandalf first came on the screen, it was like, there he is.
Nailed it.
He just stepped out of my mind onto the screen.
Yeah.
With basically all that stuff. So Trump's mission statement being that speech, and then actions that don't seem to align with it. It's tempting to think that he's not who he says he is, and he's not faithful to us. He's abandoning us. He's selling out. All the different things that you see people making in comments.
Right.
I mentioned that, I forgot, a number of episodes ago. It might have even been last week. I can't remember. It all just blends together. Look at the result in us, not the institutions, but in us. And not just us, but even people that we would consider to be the quote unquote normies. I've been against vaccines my entire adult life. That was like one of the topics that my wife and I actually had real fights about early in our marriage, because she grew up.
Well, they put the fear of God. They traumatize women with that.
Oh yeah.
And I learned that firsthand last year. We were already on the same page, thank God, because of COVID and everything.
Right.
But that helped us get on the same page. But yeah, man, my kid's turning a year old in a couple of weeks, and man, they're fucking terrorists. They're emotional
Oh, yeah.
terrorists with
Yeah.
these women in particular.
So yeah, my wife was all like, "Oh no, we need to do that." And I was like, but it was like, okay, Christian, wife submission and all that. I don't like it, but I'm going to submit, kind of thing. And then over the years, thankfully, she came around to that. And then 2020 was like, I'm so glad I submitted to you.
Yeah.
Trad wife for the win. Whenever you bring up that topic in years past or anything like that, you would get tremendous pushback and just immediately shut down and castigated and called all sorts of horrible names. Whereas now, even growing up homeschooled, why aren't you in school? We go to the grocery store in the middle of the day, kind of thing, and you get the weird side eyes. And what do you do about socialization? All this kind of stuff. It's like, use your imagination. Like what you have to have the institution give it to you. Now, whenever you bring those things up, and this is all since Trump. Oh, I wish I could homeschool my kid. Oh, my sister homeschools her kids. Oh, actually, yeah, we're thinking about pulling our kids out and homeschooling next year. Oh, yeah, I wish I hadn't vaccinated my children. My daughter, she's not vaccinating, or my grandchildren, and I'm super happy about it. That's the type of response that you usually get now.
Yep.
So
it's a massive shift in a short period of time.
To the point where even doing a show on how the Constitution is full of shit is getting very positive reception among people who, if you were on the outside looking in, you'd be like, oh, those are like hardcore constitutionalists, which probably a lot of them still are. And, I'm working on that. But the fact that I can do the show that I'm doing and have even the modicum of the reception that I'm getting is an indication of the massive shift that is directly tied to Trump, which is why it often gets said, I think even Ash said it last night, that, and Chris has said this, I know you've said it as well, that Trump is like the only one who gets the benefit of the doubt, and to a point. And the reason why is not because, oh, this agency's gone, and because hey, Department of Education's still there, and where are the Epstein files and all that kind of crap. Look at the people, look at the conversations we're having, and within Badlands, the conversations are obviously going to be far outside the norm. But go to your like people I talk to at work. There's a guy I was talking to at work about this. I'm always talking about this stuff at work, but even last year, before I'd even really dug into how the British basically have maintained control over the U.S. from the beginning, he was like, "Yeah, I don't think the Constitution was legitimate." And he had never read Spooner or anything. He just like, it just can't be when you see the way the world is today.
Right.
Like he wouldn't have made that comment 10 years ago, and so that to me is the answer to the Trump paradox, is not what's happening on the institutional level, because guess what? The institution doesn't matter in the long run, as long as we, the people, actually assume the mantle of our power, understand what that means. That's why I love Spooner, because he really does lay out what that actually means and who the people actually are. But I look at just the conversations we're having, and to me, that is the piece of the puzzle that, oh, that makes sense. Okay, that's how I can reconcile those things and tell myself to calm down when I get tired of listening to narrative fog.
Very, very well said, man. And if I want to make another Aragorn appeal, because I have a like-minded based individual on stream, so Lord Tolkien appeals are expected and enhancements to all conversations in which they appear, which Jonathan understands. Mm-hmm. I consider, I was a big Gandalf guy. I've got Glamdring behind me, which is not the sword of Gandalf, even though the movie marketing says that. It's actually the sword of Fingon, and it was wielded in the Fall of Gondolin. So that's a whole other rabbit hole. But besides that,
that's in the Silmarillion, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Silmarillion's my favorite of Tolkien.
I bought a copy of that this past summer because it had been years since I've read it, and I need to get back into.
It reads to me like a real history.
That's the way the Lord of the Rings does too to me.
It feels like a real history. But I was gonna say, even though obviously he's a very important character, a major character, maybe it seems vanilla, but the character who's really grown on me in terms of the narrative, and especially the portrayal in the movies, even though I have problems with them too, they're very near and dear to my heart otherwise, is Aragorn. I think, especially Viggo, I think Viggo actually brought a lot to that character that arguably wasn't even in Tolkien, and that's a little blasphemous to say, but speaking of paradoxes, there's kind of this like constant push and pull of like the very things that make Aragorn the ideal leader heading into essentially the rebirth of or heading into the Fourth Age in Middle Earth are the things that originally keep him from reaching out to try to seize that power. And I see many analogs to Trump in the Aragorn character. And I wanted to bring up a biblical passage here. I know that you're very versed on this stuff. I am not, but I sometimes like that. I like sort of that this really struck me. I've mentioned it on a show a few months ago. Ghost brought this up in a private conversation. But on everything you just said about Donald Trump, there's another guy who said something. Jesus. He says,
pretty good guy,
Yeah. He says that. So I had never heard of this passage until, and of course I haven't read the Bible, but like there's so many passages that are kind of just ubiquitous in culture.
Oh yeah.
If you follow MMA professionally, like I did for my entire living, has been in combat sports. 50% of fighters have Bible verses tattooed on them. Yep. So like you're gonna get exposed to that in the combat sports world. Never have seen this. And it's my favorite one now. Jesus says, I've come to set the world on fire, and I wish it were already burning. I have a terrible baptism of suffering ahead of me, and I am under a heavy burden until it is accomplished. Do you think I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I have come to divide people against each other. From now on, families will be split apart, 3 in favor of me and 2 against, or 2 in favor and 3 against. Father will be divided against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Then Jesus turned to the crowd and said, when you see the clouds beginning to form in the west, you say, here comes a shower, and you are right. When the south wind blows, you say, today will be a scorcher, and it is. You fools, you know how to interpret the weather signs of the earth and sky, but you don't know how to interpret the present times. And man, certainly open to interpretation in many different ways, but I'm not saying Donald Trump is Jesus, so before the one person in chat freaks out, Donald Trump, how do I say this? First of all, I co-sign everything you just said about Trump. I think it was well said. Trump is many people in this audience's gateway into the awakening. Narratively, he's a cognitive cipher. That's why I call him that, right? And it's almost like early into your awakening journey, if you came by way of Trump or Q, which is kind of adjacent, right? All related to that same story of Donald Trump. Even the Q drops say, like, Trump is the vehicle through which this is all happening, narratively anyway. Early on, it's almost like you put everything on Trump. You're like, Trump is the guy, Trump is the movement, Trump is the story, Trump is the actual. And then maybe a few years in, you're like, well, there's patriots behind him, there's military, there's the deep state might be bigger than we thought. Maybe I like these things Trump says, maybe I don't like these other things. And maybe there's this like maturation process that happens where you still have this respect for Trump and, you understand, maybe you have a more nuanced understanding of the position he's in and the part he's playing, and that maybe it's not all Trump and that Trump isn't the one doing everything and saving us from the enemy, right? So I'd call that a maturation.
Kind of screwed.
Yeah. That's kind of a maturation, I would say. But oddly, what you said and that Bible verse that I brought up makes me think, in the last year or two, I've really grown to believe, I think I now think of Trump as even more seismic of a figure than I originally did. It's almost like, originally I'm like, man, it's all about Trump. Then you go through this maturation process. And now I'm not back to it's all about Trump on a literal level, but more what I mean is what he has brought, the gift that Trump has given. I think Chris Paul referred to him as the divider in chief in something he wrote. I don't know when that was, a year or 2 years ago, something like that. And look at that Bible verse, right? You don't have to be directly comparing somebody like Trump to Jesus Christ to see that what is Jesus Christ supposed to embody? As a non-biblical scholar, to me, it's natural law, it's truth, it's logos, it's first principles, you might say. How much more first principle does it get than Jesus? So when I see the ultimate embodiment of logos, of natural law, of goodness, of righteousness, and of morality saying, I am here to fuck up your paradigm. I am here to fuck it all up. And you're trying to predict the weather. And obviously, I think he's using that as an analog. I don't think Jesus was actually that mad about people divining the weather. I think he's using it, and sometimes I think maybe Trump and the Patriots are sitting there going, you motherfuckers are trying to match patterns, which was really important maybe at the beginning to understand that there's a larger thing going on here. And I still think can be useful if used in that way. I think Brad, I think Alpha, I think Josh do a good job of that. I think there's plenty of Q people that do a good job of that. But there's also people that, as Chris say, practice divination. Mm-hmm. And they're just trying to get a high score in terms of what they can match up with each other. And I would say that the gift Trump has given us is the sifting, this era, this decade of completely upending the American and the global paradigm and provoking, you just mentioned it, with whether you talk about vaccines, government itself, the fact that at Badlands now, like, we're becoming pariahs, maybe in a good way, in the truth community for daring to question where we're going and whether or not we want to go to that place that our supposed betters are bringing us to. Right. And I would just argue that Trump, I don't think, has made any bones about it, just like Jesus didn't make any bones about that he was here to bring division. I don't think Trump has really made any bones about that. And I guess, I don't know if that made sense, but that's why my respect for him has almost grown after that middle period of being like, he's not the be all end all. Now I'm like, man, I think he's accomplished a lot of that division, but ultimately the choice is each of ours to say, like, are you willing to step into the fire and engage in the division in order to get to a better place than where we're coming from?
Yeah. There's a lot there. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, like, there's a lot of weighty truth to what you just said. On like a practical level, when Jesus is saying you can predict the weather, but you can't even figure out what time you're living in. This was he's speaking to a group of people who obsessed about the scriptures, which they attested, rightfully so, as being direct words from the creator of the universe, who told them to expect the Messiah and gave very blatant and clear signposts that
decodes.
Yeah. These were the original Match Online people, and they completely missed the boat. And it's in the gospel, or the Christmas story. A lot of people are going to be reading the Christmas story here this time of the year. And the wise men, these magi, they come from the east because they had it figured out. And they come up to Jerusalem. They go to the leaders and they go, hey, where's this king that's going to be born? Which was a prophecy going back to Balaam during the Israelite conquest. So 1,500 years earlier, almost 1,400 years earlier, that a star would rise. And the Magi come and they say, hey, where's this king? And they're like, oh yeah, he's going to be born in Bethlehem, because we know that. The king's born in Bethlehem. It didn't click to them, hey, these guys, it wasn't just three guys. It would have been this massive entourage. Maybe we should check that out. No, instead they conspire with Herod to try to murder him because their power structure was threatened. Call them the Republican establishment. And so that's what, when Jesus is saying, you can't even, you can figure out the weather, but you're not even following the signs that were plainly given to you and recognize who's here. Because like he tells John the Baptist when John the Baptist is in prison and his disciples come to Jesus because he sends them to Jesus. Are you the one, or should we look for some? John the Baptist was given the role of being the voice crying in the wilderness, making straight the paths for the coming of the Messiah. And so his disciples show up and they go, hey, are you the one, or should we look for another? And Jesus's answer wasn't, I'm it. He goes, the lame are walking, and I think he even says the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor. Like, what else do you want? Like, I'm doing what I was foretold to be doing, which proves I am who I say I am. So applying that analog to Trump, obviously Jesus being the ultimate first principle, because he is God, you can't get more first principle than that.
Right.
Applying that pattern then to anyone who is pushing the truth, in the same way that there's the Bible talks about the spirit of Antichrist, which a lot of Christians look for, and a specific Antichrist. I don't know about that per se, but there's definitely a spirit or an archetype of an Antichrist.
Yeah.
And in the same way, there's an archetype of Christ. And that Moses was because Moses even said, there's one that's greater than me, but who's basically like me, who's going to come after me. He's speaking of the Messiah down the road. King David was, Jesus is referred to as the son of David. That was a term used to apply to the Messiah. So Jesus fulfilled that archetype. In a way, as blasphemous to a lot of Christians as this would sound, Trump does fit that because, again, going back to my comments about what we're talking about and how truth is the sifter, and that we are all being funneled into a more realistic view of our situation. Actually, and that's what natural law is, adhering to what nature actually is. Natural law is distilled down to one word, which is love, which is, Jesus says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love God and love your neighbor. That's natural law. And that there's also an element where Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice. And so when why do some people, they can hear the words of Christ, they can read through the scriptures and they're like, this is crap. And then other people, this is one of the self-authenticating aspects of scripture, is that it's not that I encounter God on the when I'm reading it. Well, it's not because you have this existential experience per se, but it's that when you read it, you recognize it for what it is, because Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice. So applying that on a secular level, if someone is primed in their hearts to receive truth and then they hear it, they're gonna be like, there it is. That's why, as people can see through the bombastic layers of Donald Trump and be like, okay, something's going on there.
Right.
Because they're able to see the lies and deception.
It's like a calibration.
Yes. And so it's the ultimate sifter. So yeah, it's on one hand, it's kind of sacrilegious to compare Trump to Jesus, because obviously there is no comparison. But as far as an archetype goes, I have absolutely no problem comparing them to each other, because on a human to human level, and many people have come to a belief in God and then ultimately in Christ, because I think that's the end goal. As you've even described your own departure from atheism, or a form of agnosticism.
Cute atheism, agnosticism.
Yeah.
I did always believe there was something going on.
Yeah.
But I'll say my version of being an atheist was actually more active than I've even talked about. It was more of a rejection of the idea of God because of depravity and not just crime, but real suffering, which is a tale as old as time, right? Biblical scholars and Christians are no strangers to that, but it was a very conscious decision on my part. Yeah. Just of seeing, and for me, like at the age old argument was, how could, funny enough, in a otherwise kind of bad movie, Batman versus Superman, Lex Luthor famously says, if God is all powerful, he cannot be all good. And if God is all good, he cannot be all powerful. I'm not saying that that's true,
right?
But that is basically the argument that I was making 15 years ago.
Which, as an aside on that, the way I would always counter that, if God's all powerful, can he make a rock so big that he can't lift it, or could he make a square circle? And my answer to that has always been, would you be able to recognize if he could?
Right.
And so it's not a limitation.
Even perceive it.
It's not a limitation on God. It's more of an admission of limitation of our own perceptive abilities. Going back to Trump and Lord of the Rings, because obviously you have to.
Let's get back to Aragorn.
Yeah. As we were talking before the show, like in my mind, Trump is Boromir and Aragorn and Frodo, a little bit of Gandalf, all kind of thrown into one character, and that's maybe what he also does when he's weaving, and is that he's kind of going back and forth between the two. But as far as what he's doing by marching straight into the camp of the enemy, grabbing their weapon and using it against them, which would kills Boromir basically, but it's like Trump is using it as he's throwing it into Mount Doom.
So this is something that I've mentioned in the context of Trump. I've mentioned in the context of just the info war in general, us as a community mission statement. I wrote an article years ago, 2022, I think, all about Boromir. Because, strangely, the older I get, I'm not saying it's my favorite character in Lord of the Rings, but it affects me the most of any character in Lord of the Rings, which was not the case when I was younger. The story of Boromir is now the story that I am most affected by, because I think it's the most human story. And I love what it
he's
does.
Kind of set up to be, right? Is like the penultimate human.
Yeah, and one of the things I've really grown to, some people have disagreed with me. I've had disagreements in the chat here. It's just my interpretation. One of the things I've really grown to love about that character, and Sean being a fucking all-time performance.
If you don't slightly choke up at his death scene, you're not human.
But the performance, that in one film, to go from the guy that universally everyone watching that movie, if you don't know about the story, is like, this motherfucker, like at every scene, and then to completely pivot at the end and just be like, man, that's our guy.
I can get emotional just thinking about it.
Yeah. but on the topic we're talking about, there's a couple things with Boromir that really appeal to me. One of them is I think something I didn't pick up on when I was younger is that Tolkien didn't create this shitty guy that then has this redemption on his death. We've seen that a million times. We've seen the archetype. We've seen the redemption archetype. That's not really what's going on with Boromir. Boromir's a very complex character who is wrapped up in the sins of his father. Mm-hmm. So it's like he's trying to be a good son. He's trying to lead a nation of men. He is objectively, which he points out at the council, doing the most against the enemy than anybody there, including and especially Aragorn. So when you're watching that through Western narrative framing in the movie, even subconsciously, you're like, this motherfucker, he doesn't know our boy Aragorn. How's he going to talk to him that way?
Right.
From Boromir's perspective, he's like, I know exactly who you are. And now that Legolas has told me who you are, I despise you even more that you dared to come to this council and show your fucking face when I've buried hundreds of men in the last decade because you won't do what is required of you. Now, obviously, there's a whole nuanced debate there, but I think what Tolkien did that's really masterful with him, and I think Sean Bean and Peter Jackson, I'll give him credit, nailed it in that script, is he's not a bad man who succumbs to darkness. He's the greatest of men who succumbs to darkness. And it is because of his virtue that the ring is such a draw to him.
Yeah.
It's because he is arguably the strongest member of the fellowship, the goodest member of the fellowship in terms of he wants to do good unto the world through power. So to bring this back to what Jonathan just queued up there, one of the things I've been obsessed with applying the Lord of the Rings to the Infowar, I promise that there's a point here, guys, is that Boromir's...
It doesn't have to be, by the way.
There doesn't have to be, that's true. Boromir's central argument at the council is to appeal to using the weapon of the enemy against him. And, ultimately, the spoiler alert is, I don't think that that's the right move. But it does make me think of Donald Trump and of this movement. And, the more I think about it, I still can't get away with it. I still can't get away from it, rather, of looking at everything as Trump is doing, and especially like the sifting process that has shocked a lot of people in our community of like how contentious the MAGA movement has become. I think there's a lot of Boromir in Donald Trump, and maybe knowing what's going on. Like, he's in the pit, he's in Mordor, and maybe he knows there's aspects of what he's doing in this time and place that is not what you ideally would be doing. And he's like, yeah, this isn't about me at the end of the day. This is about setting up whoever comes after me. I don't mean a president, by the way. I mean the American people. So anyway, that's the weapons of the enemy refrain. I think it's a beautiful paradox in Lord of the Rings, and I think of it often when it comes to Donald Trump and this whole movement.
Well, and I think the character of Boromir, it's interesting. You point out that he's like the most noble. He is. I mean, Aragorn was protecting the Shire, but Boromir was there on the doorstep of the enemy's stronghold and fighting, and that was his life from the time he was a child up. And he was the best. So his fall is less commentary on him, and it's more commentary on the weapon of the enemy, and that it doesn't matter how good you are, using the weapon of the enemy is going to destroy you.
Yeah.
Which is then interesting thinking about Trump in that context, because obviously, as we kind of bantered around before the show, like what the weapon of the enemy actually is. And I don't know that there's actually one answer to that per se. Maybe, over given enough time, we could distill it down to that. But I certainly am not going to arrogate myself and say that I'm better than Boromir. And so for me, the answer on a personal level, like Trump is doing what Trump is doing. But for me, on a personal level, I shouldn't even look at the weapons of the enemy. I need to, on a personal level, I need to be, one of the hobbits just caring about food and smoking, because I like this. We're talking about meta narratives here, and not just like stories, but like actual movements of history, where we are essentially the hobbits, as much as we'd like to be Aragorn or whatever else. And so, it doesn't really ever. It's like Merry and Pippin aren't ever really tempted by the ring, right? Sam, to some degree, is able to carry it because Frodo, something about hobbits, they can kind of withstand it, but obviously won't get too far down that road. But on a personal level, we should take the story of Boromir as recognizing that it doesn't matter how good you are, if you try to do what the enemy does to defeat the enemy, you're going to. It's the Vegas, house always wins,
right,
concept.
Yeah, and that's what I struggle with it back and forth. And I guess to bring it back to Trump, maybe this year in particular, if I were to, I guess it's less distilling what the weapon of the enemy is, and it's more expanding. We got to put a wide net over what it is.
Although there is a unifying theme, I would say probably somewhere in there. But yeah,
a word might be government, system,
centralization.
Centralization. But let's use government to be simple about it, at least as one argument of saying Donald Trump, the reason that I think of him as a paradoxical figure is that I think most people would agree that on at least some level, a core component of the story of Donald Trump, since he came down the escalator, and his own projection, his stated goal, is he has risen up as a response to a fundamental betrayal of the people by its government. by its leadership, by whatever you want, whatever word you want to use, right? Like, that is unique. That is very unique in modern history for a figure that big and that powerful, or to get that powerful in the zeitgeist, I mean, to ride that kind of a wave into his power. And, the reason I think of Boromir with him is that, well, now he's sitting on the throne, right? It's like the Jaime Lannister abdicating the throne. Ned Stark didn't want the throne. All these kind of things from Game of Thrones, which is obviously a more nihilist take on Lord of the Rings. But there's a lot of the same themes going on there of, can you have a good king? That's like the argument at the heart of the nihilist Game of Thrones, which is like, no, you can't. You have to break the system ultimately. I ultimately think that story is a little bit more nihilist, as I said, because I don't think that it ultimately has a good conception of how things will go after the wheel is broken. But it does come to that conclusion of like, the wheel must be broken. And, I guess on the Boromir angle, you could argue that Donald Trump is wielding the power of the enemy by wielding the government apparatus that he basically rose in opposition to. But to play devil's advocate against myself, at least one of the themes that he's put forth in 2025 is this stripping away of government power, or at least that's the narrative, right? The stripping away of administrative power. And I think that's the real paradox at the heart of Trumpism, of saying the American people need a strong leader and a weak government. And I'm going to use my power as the leader of the government and define that authority in opposition to the system and the administrative state in order to strip away the very powers that I wield. That's a white-pilled reading of the story of Trump, but I think it's consistent with what he originally laid out, and I wonder if that's why things have been so contentious.
Well, and that dovetails or mirrors into what you used to talk about with the Spider-Man train, and speeding, accelerating the money printers to essentially take down that system. That's using the weapon of the enemy. The manipulation of money is near and dear to their heart. I mean, that's something that I kind of discovered, Spooner had already kind of laid it out, but I discovered for myself that the reason why government will never get smaller is because the Constitution allows the government to borrow and tax. And it borrows so that it can tax. And there's a quote from Alexander Hamilton exactly to that point where he's like, a national debt will be a blessing because it gives us an excuse to tax people. It's like,
that motherfucker. I fucking hate Alexander Hamilton.
Hey, when they tell you who they are, you should believe them, right? Event 201 and all that. So
also, when they make Broadway plays after him in the communist era, like peak gayness in our entertainment storytelling apparatus, when Juan-Manuel Miranda comes out there and makes Alexander, revives the ghost of Hamilton to be the paragon of the American founding, and it's plastered across Broadway and Disney and all the rest of it. You should take some hints from what is going on there, and who this guy was.
Right. Yeah. Aaron Burr, one of America's greatest heroes. I think his story afterwards is probably something that there's a lot of non-truth to. Because he kind of crashed and burned according to the official narrative. But yeah, I lost my train of thought. But yeah.
Is Trump stripping away the very weapon? Is Trump within the weapons of the enemy system? Is he within the enemy system? Is he stripping it away? Is he using it or is he destroying it?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so money being that I think one of their main weapons, he absolutely is doing that. And, you think about Bitcoin, I've become, reading Spooner has made me more of a rabid maximalist. Spooner has a quote that I've used a lot. All political power, as it is called, rests on the matter of money. And then he says, once you understand that, there are a number of things that that are axiomatic as results of that, and one of them is that the only security that you can have for your political liberty is to keep your money in your pocket. And so governments will borrow. That's why governments will always get bigger, because they need an excuse to tax. Yeah, we got on with Alexander Hamilton, that asshole. And so by Trump sort of, I mean, he's borrowed more than like any other president ever. And it's like, well, whoa, wait a minute, man. It's like, but that's him using the weapon of the enemy. And again, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt on that, because I see the effects of the awakening. Mm-hmm. And so you have to then, well, I believe it is wise to interpret then what he's doing with something like accelerating the money printers, and recognize that it is within context of giving power back to the people. Because if you ultimately crash the money system, help to onboard the parallel rails that gives us an opportunity to do something that we've never really been able to do, I think that speaks to what he's doing. And so then you can apply that to any agency. And then ultimately it goes back to as well that it doesn't matter if those agencies still exist. We have to grow up, and we have to meet, not even in the middle. Like, we don't even have to ever meet up with Trump. Like, it's not like he's reaching down. He's the power's back to the people. Now go for it.
Right.
We become the end of the state, and we have to become the end of the state by not creating a new one.
Yeah, that's it. Should go without saying.
Another
seems like that's a big
out of the
hurdle.
Frying pan into the fire. You know.
Yeah. How are you doing in terms of power levels?
Oh, I'm good. You're
good. You want to just?
I don't get conversations like this.
All right, because
people.
I fucked up the whole beginning of the show, so we lost like a half an hour. So we're gonna take. We're gonna, if it's cool with you, we will take you guys up until the Q Boys, and get out of here before then. I want to, if you need a quick break for 1 minute, I'm gonna thank our final sponsor here, and then we'll transition on this topic into more of the founding and maybe what Trump could be recalling here. Get into a little bit more of the first principles we're talking about tonight. So we are also brought to you by ourselves at Badlands through Soft Disclosure.
Soft Disclosure just dropped new favorites for the season. The lotion, your 5-ounce favorite, is still here. And now we've added full 11-ounce bottles. New Lavender Tea Tree Deodorant, clean, calm, and effective. New Tallow Bars, Chamomile Lemon Rose and Naked. Rich moisture that actually works. And now the lineup is complete. Beard oil in unscented and spiced vanilla. Palo lip balms, available in chamomile mint, vanilla, naked, and vanilla tangerine. Palo Bar Minis for pocket-ready hydration. Available in vanilla coffee and naked. And finally, lavender vanilla lotion. Clean, calm, and made to work. Visit softdisclosure.com. Use code Badlands and get 15% off. Soft Disclosure, for truth you can gift.
Soft Disclosure, thank you guys for supporting us. Again, everything you buy through them directly supports everybody at Badlands, and it's damn good stuff. People are loving it, helping a small business there in Colorado. Also, just in case anybody didn't know, Jonathan Drake is the guy who made me not one, but 2 handcrafted replicas of Gandalf's pipe for smoke weed, because one of them was stolen by colored folk in North Carolina, which is true. Partly my fault, but thank you very much for this, Jonathan. I still have not smoked out of it because I want a lesson, and we didn't get to do that at Deadwood. So maybe this coming Deadwood we can.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think Jonathan will be making every person watching the show tonight their own version of this. No, but this stuff. This is awesome.
People have asked if I used to make them and sell them, and I just don't have time anymore. So I have
someday.
Relegated.
You can retire on the rocking chair.
Yeah, exactly. Which, as a quick aside, I've had this sit on my desk, so it's safe. But this is one that I'm actually working on right now.
Is that Bilbo?
No, this is actually Peter the Great.
Oh yeah. You were showing me pictures of that.
Yeah, this is the Tsar Carpenter. There's a statue of him that's now in St. Petersburg. It used to be in the Netherlands, because he went and disguised himself as a shipbuilder to learn how to build ships to bring back to Russia so they could bring their navy into the modern era, modern 1700s. But yeah, so
if you guys come to a GART that Jonathan is at, Make him take out his phone and show you all the stuff he's been building, because it's going to blow your mind. Eventually, I need to become a big enough deal for one of those spinny things that you.
I have plans for more, but it's just the time. I got 2 daughters. One's a teenager, one's about to be, and it's life just has a way of getting in the way of other things.
Yeah, I'm recognizing that early on. All right, so we're talking about Trump and some of this, some of the paradoxical nature here. I think. I totally agree with how you left that off in terms of we can observe what Trump is doing, obviously pay attention to the signal that he's putting out, and we're interpreting that, obviously, in whatever way we can. But ultimately, I do think that it's about us. It's about going forth, maybe using him as a signal or a motivation to do that. And I would also add to that, this is something that, Chris talks about this, John talks about this with the feedback loop idea. And I really started to key in on this in late 2024 with how often Trump was using the word mandate. When you're talking about signal, one of the really easiest bits of signal, in my view, with Trump is just, what is he repeating? This is with anybody, any communicator, right? What are the principles that they're repeating? What are they trying to really get across? 2024, one of the terms that he used to really anchor that campaign was mandate. This is a mandate election, he kept saying. I know that that's a catch-all term, but I've obviously been using that term so much it became a meme at Badlands since 2022. But I think that was signaled because I think part of what you're talking about, some would say, oh, well, what do you think the whole plan was about? It's just for us to go off and do our own thing. Well, yes. But also, if I want to lend a hand backwards and say, like, come with us. This is not black pilling. This is actually white pilling to go do your own thing and not wait for Donald Trump. Is I would key in on Trump's messaging around mandate and say that if we lead Trump, meaning like, as a dog or whatever, forward scouts, forward base camp, we are carving the battle space forward. We are pushing forward in the battle space and setting anchor points where he can then catch up. I don't think that we're any kind of revelation to Donald Trump, the American people, but that's how I've really started to think of this, of more like, okay, there's certainly something to be said for when Trump came into the zeitgeist. He certainly felt like a leader, like he was the prow of the ship, parting the seas and be like, we're fucking going in that direction over there. Mm-hmm. But it's become clear to everybody who's willing to be honest that that boat is in choppy waters and the system is vast and complicated and the collective mind is far more retarded than a lot of us, myself included, thought it was going to be. You put a lot of white pills on it tonight, which I think are apt. People talking about vaccine. I think a lot of the awakening is people not even aware that they're in an awakening process. Talked about this with Brad last week. People are more awake and questioning things. We should be thankful for that. It's a good thing. The collective mind has evolved and has moved forward. But we were all drastically wrong in terms of the pace of the awakening, the scope of the awakening, what it meant in terms of the rest of the collective mind. There's people in this community who still think like certain documents are kind of going to come out that wake up their neighbors. It's not going to happen. That isn't going to happen. Even if the documents come out and it's everything you ever thought they were going to be, that's not how the awakening works. You're either in it or you're being carried along with it. And to put a white pill on that, like I said, when Jonathan says you got to go forward and, go forth and prosper, I think you're also helping to actualize the plan and you're helping to give Trump a path to sort of leap toward and create that wake. Because obviously, we would all acknowledge that a character, a story as powerful as Trump is clearly able to move the zeitgeist in ways we cannot. But if we can lead the zeitgeist in small ways and get it inching in those directions by just leaping forward, he's able to cover that gap, I think. So, you're doing the best thing for yourself as a sovereign, but I also think you are helping the plan, on a larger scope by doing that and living in that way.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, the awakening or getting our country back is kind of like Trump is going to come in, and on the plantation, the housing for the slaves, the roofs are leaking, and he's going to fix the roofs, and the fence, that keeps us in, it's kind of rusty and it needs painted again. So we're going to spruce it up and we're making America great. Like, no, like the idea is we're not stuck in that. We don't. That's why I mentioned earlier that on my first episode, I said that we're not beholden to Trump's vision of things. Like, go west, young man, like that adage. Like, go claim your heritage of freedom. We talk about the founding of this country and what the entire basis for fighting a revolution in the first place, actually, being based on natural law. I mean, that language is all throughout the founding fathers' writings. And it turns out that I think a lot of us are really afraid to actually live in that. And I would imagine, you guys have talked about the Trump feedback loop. Chris has definitely talked about that. And I have to believe that if the news came out on some high profile trial that the jury nullified the law that was being used against like if it was the Tina Peters situation, the jury was like, yeah, I don't care what the judge says. We're going to,
this is our ruling.
Yeah. We don't like the rules that you have. So we're going to, nullify them publicly. Trump would be like, we're a nation of rule of law. This is terrible. But that would be like, oh, good.
Yep.
They're getting it. They're figuring it out. Like, you don't need these overlords to come in and tell you how to live. But that's really scary for people. But yeah, and then like with the founding document stuff, the ethos of what we're told about our founding is something that it's hard to read Spooner and come away from that accepting any of that at face value anymore. And I'm okay with that. Like, a lot of people I crossed that bridge a long time ago, so it's more jarring for people than it is for me. But if we're going to go forward, then we have to be honest about where we came from, and we have to be honest about the system. Like that, there's the quote in the appendix of the No Treason essay that is like his last line in the essay. He says that in fact, let me pull it up so I don't butcher it here. He says, let's see, No Treason number 6. My browser automatically pulls it up. He says, whether the Constitution to really be one thing or another, this much is certain, that it has either authorized such a government as we have had or has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is unfit to exist. Mic drop. So yeah, that's been a major push for me with my approach to things is like, look, we're not stuck to someone else's vision. Let's stop. Let's if the weapon of the enemy is dishonesty, Trump can navigate the psyop fields and use measures of deception, the fog of war, and all that. We don't have to do that. That's Chris Paul's whole push.
Yeah,
we can be honest. So let's be honest about our founding. Let's be honest about the values. The values are worth keeping, but the way it was implemented was completely antithetical to the values. Let's not make the same mistake.
Right.
And so I don't know where you want to go from
yeah, no, I think that's a good direction to go in. And maybe the way I would couch this, because we're going to talk about the Constitution. We're going to talk about a couple of founding documents. And, the way I would couch this, I made this argument at the last 2 GARTs, I believe, Cocoa Beach and Deadwood before this, and I haven't gone nearly down the same rabbit holes in terms of breadth of reading and all that on this argument as you and Chris have. But on a just first principles level, the way I'm a broken record for the last few years. I talk about the net effects refrain. It's kind of my response to when people challenge my fixation on narrative, and they say, how do you orient yourself in reality if you're only focused on narrative? And I often appeal to the net effects refrain, which isn't foolproof. It's just a It's just a kind of heading. And essentially, we talked about this last night on the Power Hour. Do I know what the truth is with Nicolas Maduro versus Marina Corina Machado? No, I don't know. The honest truth is I don't know what the truth is there. But I know what the net effects of the Marina Corina Machado narrative are. NGO founding, collectivism, globalism, regime change, all the rest of it, right? We don't have to revisit all that. But that's how I orient myself in a chaotic narrative, going like, where is this story trying to bring me?
Right.
Where is that story trying to bring me? The reason I bring that up in the context of the Constitution is that it's kind of, if you dig deep enough into most conversations with a self-described truther or particularly MAGA person, Trumper, they're going to appeal to the Constitution. And most of them, I don't believe, are appealing to the Constitution on a first principles basis, which I'm more willing to have that conversation. I think they're appealing to the agreement, the document, the contract. And the argument I laid out in Deadwood and Cocoa Beach that I think should be inarguable is that whether or not you believe in returning to the Constitution, let's just give you that. Let's say that that is what you think we should do. Watching this show right now. It is inarguable that if the Constitution was the answer, it would have been the answer. The idea that that is controversial to say in this community is as infuriating as it is worrying. Because to me, it demonstrates why a conversation like this is necessary, the larger conversation that Jonathan is one of the main figures advancing, as is Chris Paul, of are we going back far enough, or should we be going back far at all? And again, the argument I'm making is that before you even get into whether or not the argument laid out in the Constitution was the right argument, it didn't work. The number of people who got mad at me for saying that, when they only know me because we found each other in a movement that stands in direct opposition to everything that this nation has become, is astounding. If the Constitution was going to prevent tyranny, it would have prevented tyranny. If you want to argue that even Chris, and I don't mean Chris makes this argument, but I mean Chris brings up the 14th Amendment a lot, which I think he's doing that for good reason.
Yeah.
But my argument would be, if an amendment can amend a contract that is going to bring us into a golden age or return us to a golden age, it didn't work.
Nothing.
And
like Chris's refrain about nothing can stop what is coming except for a TV character.
Amendment. Right.
Nothing can stop the government from becoming tyrannical except an amendment.
Yeah. And one more little aside I'll make on this to pass it to you, just to open this conversation about why it's important to talk about the Constitution, and you need to get all the way out of your feelings if it upsets you of people saying we're America First MAGA people who maybe don't believe the Constitution is the answer to everything, is I would appeal to a Game of Thrones quote by Tywin Lannister when he says, "A lion does not concern himself with the opinions of sheep." Yeah. And that is, that's not us. That's not me saying that. It's, if a contract was going to work, the other quote there, probably the one I should have used, and we'll pivot to, again by Tywin Lannister, is there are no agreements between lions and men.
Yeah.
And that's how I have grown to think about the Constitution, right? It's like, oh, you know how we can stop a centralized globalist cabal, John? We'll just make an agreement with them.
Oh, sure.
Like, just have them sign a contract. And so anyway, that's why I think the conversation is necessary, and Jonathan's gone much farther into this. But just to set the stage of people being like, oh, is somebody like Spooner anti-America, anti-the vision, anti-all the founders, etc. To me, it's more about looking at the net effects of being like, guys, this shit doesn't seem to be working.
Right.
So, maybe we shouldn't have these kind of sacred cows. in the movement.
And it's something that I mentioned, I think it was last week. When people typically refer to the Constitution, the next words out of their mouth are free speech and Second Amendment. Those were amendments.
Not in the Constitution.
Those were concessions that were made because guys like Patrick Henry, shout out, goes to Pace Patrick Henry, they were concerned by the language, and I mean, Patrick Henry remained opposed to till the end, because they saw there was not proper concessions being made that ultimately got written, even on trial by jury. A trial by jury is mentioned in the main body of the Constitution, but then in, I think it's Amendments 6 and 7, which little sidebar because I'm digging on the subversion of trial by jury. The guy who drafted the 6th and 7th Amendments, which specifically mentioned trial by jury, James Madison, ends up appointing to the Supreme Court Joseph Story, who is the Supreme Court justice who started the subversion of trial by jury. I don't know if that's connected or not, but I thought that was interesting. But people are referring to the elements of the Constitution that were, I think, concessions by a cabal that they were like, if it's like when your enemy is agreeing with you, you probably need to take a step back and reevaluate what you're doing, because, oh, okay, we have very different goals, but they're agreeing with me. So either they're wrong or I'm wrong. We need to take a step back and look. And so when you look at the amount of time that Spooner spends on the borrowing and taxing aspects of the Constitution, and you realize that right there was the end of freedom, not immediately, but over long term. And then the reason why Spooner spends so much time as he does in that essay on the Civil War is that, he lived through it, and the Civil War was like the penultimate example of what these evil bastards will do to keep their grip on power, and that they're not going to be like the movie character who's evil and acts evil. No, it's
for unification.
It was to preserve our glorious union.
Unity, right? Isn't
Unity.
That word just comes up so often, doesn't it?
Those fucking bastards. So, and they shroud it like, we got to free the slaves. Actually, what we figured out is we can free these slaves and make everybody a slave.
Yep.
And so that's talking about the net effects of Trump and using that to determine, to answer the question of the paradox. I'm willing to concede that many of the founding fathers went along with, and many of the people in the founding generation went along with the Constitution as a concept. They firmly believed in the values that gave birth to the Constitution, but that they were deceived. But they were all of them deceived.
Right.
And here's Lord of the Rings again.
That's
Sauron. Yeah. Sauron comes in, Alexander Hamilton, and he's the mouth of Sauron. They put in the weapon of the enemy into the document itself, the borrowing and taxing. And that was the reason why they got rid of the Articles of Confederation, because they didn't have the power to tax, so they didn't have the power to borrow, which is how they make money. That's how Spooner calls he names the Rothschilds as being a representative of the blood money loan mongering class that are the real rulers. You got your rulers, you got your presidents, your senators, your judges, all that. They're the tools. And ultimately he calls the real rulers the secondary class is the secret band of robbers and murderers, secret by virtue of a secret ballot, because no one in government can prove that anyone voted for them because of the secret ballot.
Which is really an argument Trump is surfacing in 2025 about the Fed chair.
I didn't see that. Oh, yeah.
Well, just all of his back and forth about the Fed chair has created basically the modern argument and sifting on that level of, in my view, to what you're saying about Spooner here with the unelected, these shadow figures, these bankers. To me, it's much less about will Trump, won't Trump, can Trump, can't Trump, fire Jerome Powell.
He's brought them into the open. This is who you're dealing with.
I think it's more Trump saying, have you guys thought about the fact that I, as your president, and you, as the American people, are answerable to an unelected boardroom of men who decide very literally what your time and energy, i.e. life, is worth.
Right. And
on a quarter-to-quarter basis.
Shot across the bow, which I have to believe every time that he does an aside where he says something about getting rid of the income tax, makes every one of their buttholes pucker.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is the game, ultimately. I think tariffs are part of the game, and I think he's using them. That's a historical way the government generates revenue. But that was also one of the reasons why the Civil War happened, was because of predatory tariffs against the South. I won't go into that. Watch my show on some of the previous episodes, because
Sunday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, when that's backlog, so you can go back through that. But so looking at the net effects of the founding values, which we would all, to me, that's when you talk about what does it mean to be America first? What does it mean to be a patriotic American? I mean, this is going to piss a lot of people off, but I don't see the flag and get warm and fuzzies.
Yeah.
Working and living overseas, I certainly saw the net effects of that in the Middle East, because I also lived in Jordan for a summer. And so, but the values that flag is supposed to stand for, which it can again, it doesn't currently. And so when you think about those values and the concepts of freedom, the idea of honoring consent, government of, for, and by the people, once the Constitution was ratified and then enforced, that went out the window objectively. And that's what Spooner kind of holds your feet to the fire and makes you acknowledge, because he's extremely thorough in chipping away at every possible angle. Well, what about voting? Okay, here's 10 reasons why voting doesn't equal consent. Yeah. Well, paying taxes is a consent. No, it's not either.
So as far as I'm aware, again, as somebody who hasn't read Spooner, one of the core arguments he makes about the Constitution is that on just a logical level, whether or not you agreed with the arguments put forth, is that future generations de facto cannot consent to a contract that was put together by their ancestors or by their perceived betters. And that's kind of one of those, there's no, that's one of those dead end, I don't see where do you pivot away from that argument that feels like a deadlock sort of argument. Well, and that's how on earth can you consent to a contract you didn't have anything to do with?
Right. I used an analogy in one of my episodes where it's okay, imagine if someone came to your door and they were armed and they held up a piece of paper and said, "Here's a contract that authorizes me to collect $1,000 from you, and I'm authorized by this contract to take that money from you by force if you refuse. And if you want to, dispute it, there's a court that's been set up under the authority of this contract. Oh, and by the way, the judge, his salary is dependent on whether or not you pay." That's the system. Yeah. And it's I didn't sign that. I didn't
self-perpetuating
agree to that.
Engine.
Right. And it's not just that one generation can't behold another generation. It's that I can't speak on your behalf. And on point of fact, and Spooner brings this up, if you were to write a contract like the Constitution about anything else, go into any court today that derives its authority from the Constitution, you would be laughed out of court because it's not a contract. That's one. So he's it's not binding. You just don't have to abide by it because it's not binding. And so then the obvious answer is anyone who is using it as their basis of authority, they're not acting on authority of anyone that voted for them, because they can't prove they voted for them because of the secret ballot. They're acting on their own. And therefore, under natural law, we all have a right to defend ourselves. And so therefore, he wrote his essays ultimately to defend the Southern soldiers who were being castigated in post-Civil War society as having committed treason. It's they weren't bound to it. It wasn't binding in the first place. But the values that created it are still worth holding on to. And So going back to the founders, I don't know that I could pick and choose which ones may or may not have been subverted or unintentionally going, but they certainly all were. I mean, they're verbose in their writings. They all talked about natural law. They all talked about consent. They all, no taxation without representation. That's consent in a nutshell. So they espoused those values. So it's like, okay, let's analyze the founding documents in light of those values, recognize where it went wrong, and not make the same mistakes going forward.
Right. And the founders is an interesting, again, theme of the show is kind of the MAGA paradox, but I think that a lot of the paradoxical nature that we've discussed tonight about Trump can apply to, I mean, even as you said, the story of the founders. Let's take their words as far as we are aware that those are their words and their arguments, the stories about the founders. I find them kind of paradoxical as well. And I've talked about this in a different context this year, just in terms of, a lot of this year I've spent arguing against unity as a philosophy, largely for personal reasons, but I also think it's the micro is the macro and the macro is the micro, as I often say. And I think this kind of schism type of crap that's going on nationally is also going on a micro, on a person to person, network to network kind of basis. And, to me, this idea that even a lot of MAGA people have, traditional conservatives in particular, of the founding fathers, even that terminology, the founding fathers, it's like...
It's religious.
It's religious, first of all, but even besides that, it's like it implies, whether you're using that as a pejorative or like a good thing, you're assigning the perception of collectivism and unity to that, right? The founding fathers. What did they do? They were building a foundation. What's the foundation? It's a base that stays together. It's a unified base on which everything else is constructed. And very famously, the founding fathers did not agree on the founding of the nation. Now, obviously, enough of them came together and signed a document that...
Nope, they didn't sign it.
Okay, well,
that's one of Spooner's
Oh, yeah,
arguments.
that's true, right. They signed a different document that I want to talk about before we get out of here.
Yeah.
But yeah, great point. We're told that they kind of codified this agreement, came up with this agreement. But, I came up with 4 founders in my own head before the show when, kind of going back and forth with Jonathan and reading about Spooner and his views on the founders. Some that I think can stand kind of the test of time, at least from what we know from a principles perspective. The ones that came to mind for me, you mentioned Patrick Henry, never consented to the Constitution, very openly opposed it, actually. Is he still a founding father, guys? Patrick Henry, founding father or not? Because he was not pro-unity and he was not a constitutionalist. So what do we do with him? Sam Adams.
Base as fuck.
I wouldn't call Sam Adams a constitutionalist. There's arguments on either side of that. I'm a Boston boy. I'm biased, but my
Bostonian too, by the way.
He is, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to make a quip about that earlier and I forgot, so thank you. Good Boston boy. They always know what they're talking about.
That's right.
And Sam Adams, though, in my view, I've always seen Sam Adams as targeting the enemy. Like his life was about that motherfucker over there.
Yeah.
That's what we got to go after. And, I've argued this a lot in terms of obviously growing up in Boston and learning about the revolution. And the revolution itself was extremely decentralized. Yeah. Like there was no agreement. There's a great SNL skit back when it was funny of like the founders meeting, the guys who went on to become the founders meeting in Philadelphia and being like, what should we do? What should we do? And the Bostonians show up and we're like, we're already fighting.
Yeah.
So like even that, there was no consent that we're all going to war with England. Boston just went to war with England. They just did.
Yeah.
Right. And even in Boston, 60% of the city was against it and 40% were for it. Right. So I guess what I'm saying is the paradox of the founding with these figures, Thomas Jefferson is another one I was going to mention, Thomas Paine, these guys, they were not unified in terms of a vision for the future, in my view. they were unified against something, which is how I lay out the concept of the Sovereign Alliance.
Yeah.
And, I wonder if we can, that's some of the spirit that went into ultimately what produced perhaps this abomination known as the Constitution. But I maybe try not to cast aspersions on all the guys who are attributed, maybe even falsely, to, like, oh, the Founding Fathers set up the Constitution. Not really. The Founding Fathers fought the enemy, and then some other guys put together the Constitution that I guess, is what we're supposed to be hearkening back to all of a sudden.
Yeah, so I went back and revisited some of the sections, because my impression with Spooner is that he doesn't pull any punches when it comes to the founders.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways I would base, or things I would base that on, is at one point in the No Treason essay, which again, that's No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority, number 6. There's 3 of them, 1, 2, and 6. 3, 4, and 5 never got published. I don't know why he just didn't call it number 3.
Must be super based.
Yeah. 1 and 2 are awesome too. They're much shorter read. They're and actually, in context of treason, one of them is trying to define treason. So it's worth, I think that's number 2. It's worthwhile reading. But anyway, so in No Treason number 6, he talks about how worthless the Constitution is, and how if it is to be preserved, like, it should be thrown into the fire and burned. But if we keep it, it should be kept as a monument to the folly and wickedness of mankind. So I interpret that as being sort of his commentary on the founding generation. But then as I was going back and reading, because I've slept since I've read it last, and reminded myself that he is a little bit more gentle, because in the first section, it's broken into 19 sections, and in the first section, he just talks about a grandparent generation cannot bind the grandchildren generation. I can't bind you. That's the error of thinking that it's a legitimate contract. But he points out that he's like, they actually didn't write it as a binding document. It's not written that way. And obviously there's the famous phrase from Benjamin Franklin about, we've given you a republic, if you can keep it, kind of thing. And so
he wasn't happy with the way that went.
Oh, yeah.
As far as we're aware. I mean, he didn't seem happy.
Well, so Spooner uses an analogy. He's like, if some guy could build a house for his children and have every intention that it be for his posterity. The phrase in the Constitution, to secure the blessings of liberty. Like, it's, hey, we think this will achieve that. And if you want to use it, go for it. But there's nothing in the wording that actually is binding about the Constitution. And so you can't really then blame the Constitution. Really, you end up having to do a little introspection and realize, actually, it's us.
Yeah.
It's the people that were there that just went along with it, and it's us that goes along with it as well, which is why the trial by jury concept becomes really important. And which is why they've really, really attacked that far more than they have the election cycle. So I'm willing to, even just recently going back and revisiting, I'm willing to soften my view on the founders, because they were such loud proponents of natural law concepts and actual concepts of liberty. I think they made a grave mistake in making concessions with the enemy, which is what the Constitution ultimately is, especially because of really
it was a peacemaking effort, essentially.
Sure. And you can boil that down into 3 specific things: the speech and debate clause, the borrow, and the taxing. The speech and debate clause means if someone puts forth a bill, votes for a bill, says something on the floor that indicates intent to deprive you of your natural rights as codified in the Bill of Rights, that's a crime in my mind. It's the law of the land. Well, is it or is it not? That should be a crime. You can't actually go after them because of the speech and debate clause, because they did it while they were on the floor. That gives them what Spooner calls absolute and irresponsible power, which is the right of property, which means they own you. And the reason why he says elections don't help you is because your only choice is to endure that usurpation for a time and then replace that person with absolute and irresponsible power with another person with absolute and irresponsible power, and the cycle just continues, which is why he saw trial by jury as being so important. So those concessions that they made were bad, but they didn't actually write it as binding. So I'm willing to, all right, take them at their word that they actually meant those things, and they just screwed up.
Right.
So
and we don't
than,
know. We're also, it's obvious to state, but I think we do lose it sometimes. We're also observing their words and arguments and supposed actions through a prism of 250 years of obfuscation as well, right? So it's like, that's where sometimes you could black pill on it or white pill on it, but sometimes the reason I trend toward the white pill on not all of the founders, but some of the founders is, man, if we still are able to put forth an earnest argument in favor of a John Adams, a Jefferson, a Paine, a Patrick Henry, etc. And they're not the only ones, but those are like the big four to me. Sure. In favor of the first principles that they espouse. And if we're able to make a good faith argument on their intentions, that's a good faith argument stretching back 250 years of intentional attempted subversion of the principles that they espoused. Yeah. So who knows what the fuck they were really intending at the time. I know we have writings and everything, but there is some level of benefit of the doubt too.
Well, and we have the pattern of politicians telling us one thing, and then like we talked about earlier with the Tea Party movement and the Patriot Act, and how they campaigned on one thing and did the exact opposite just a few months once they got in. So there could be some of that. But I mean, you can read any number of quotes from the founding fathers and be like, damn, that's awesome. Yeah. And then be like, right. But why did they go for the Constitution?
Yeah, how did it end up here? Right.
Yeah. And so hindsight being 2020, like, okay, maybe let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They got duped, and we're in a unique position to where we can correct that wrong. And we have the benefit of 250 years. We have the benefit of the Civil War having happened, in which a government, for the purpose of securing liberty, killed 1 million fucking people.
Americans. It's like, let's not leave that part out.
What's that?
I said Americans too.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Not just any people.
Yeah, they and it was all in for the purpose of preserving liberty and telling people, nah, you can't leave, because that's all the South tried to do, was just leave.
Yeah. Yep.
And this North's like, actually, no.
We meant,
it was the blood money loanmongers, because the Civil War, the cost of the Civil War was 80 to 85% financed by private blood money loanmongers who were tied to the City of London.
Yeah, it's almost like they were like, if you guys don't like it, you should just leave this mortal coil. When they tried to leave. I want to hit one more thing as we're wrapping up here, and we gotta I am an us now. We at Narrative Studios have to have Jonathan back. I know the chat's been enjoying the conversation. Fortunately, we got a late start, but to tie a bow on this part of the discussion, the Constitution angle we've hit, but I only did brief reading on this from Spooner's perspective, but it did seem that he had a very good opinion of the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. So if there's two extremely famous documents in American history, maybe a third would be the Bill of Rights, but I would say it's the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And it clicked for me immediately why a guy who took such issue with the Constitution would have the opposite viewpoint of the Declaration. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that, the Declaration versus the Constitution.
Well, I mean, simply because the Declaration is, in written form, the natural law argument of self-determination, of consent of the governed, and how violating that consent is a usurpation of natural rights. Things like trial by jury are mentioned specifically in the Declaration of Independence. And it was a very blatant and obvious way of people standing up and putting their lives on the line for the sake of actual patriotic liberty. So yeah, it's really no mystery, because the reason why he attacks the Constitution the way he does, not the Bill of Rights, but the actual body of the Constitution, is because it is so, it's like, whoa, where did that come from? Like, you started here and now you're here. Like, what happened in the middle? And so, the Declaration of Independence, it's a low-hanging fruit of something that he would absolutely be in favor of.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because, and it makes perfect sense to me. I agree with how you laid that out. I guess the way I would put it is on the theme of what I talk about all the time in terms of narrative. That's all the Declaration of Independence is, and yet that's all it needs to be.
Yeah.
And this is, you talking about natural law. You and Chris talk about natural law a lot. That's terminology is kind of new to me. Like I really haven't done a lot of reading on that, but it's self-defining, really. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to reading more about it. But I think, what's interesting too is I was surprised at how much I loved Trump's national security strategy document and the corollary to the Monroe Doctrine that he put out last week, or that we were told about last week. Not because I want regime change in Venezuela or because I'm like rah U.S. military, but because it was a narrative deployment. There's nothing binding in any of the, even in the system we're in. And I think a lot of people don't get that. They're like, oh, this is a national security strategy. There is nothing binding in the national security strategy whatsoever. Right. There's nothing binding, I mean, to the U.S. military. There is nothing binding in the Monroe Doctrine at all, even at the time. It's essentially the equivalent of Trump giving a mission statement for the use of, in my view, the use of the two main vectors of American power projection, financial and military or violent. And it's both a declaration of intent. This is how we plan to use our power going forward. More so, the reason I really loved it is it is a declaration to the empire of what you cannot do to us.
Right.
And if you do, it's implied that there will be consequences.
Right. Which is what the Constitution was supposed to, is thought of. In fact, Spooner writes about it in that way. It's kind of a no trespassing sign.
Right. But I thought it made really the national security strategy made me think of the Declaration. Part of that is probably because, it's talking about the Europeans and everything. And I think there's a lot there. I think Trump knows what he's doing. I think Trump knows he's talking to the multiple audiences when he's talking about the British Empire and everything, right? In the modern zeitgeist, MAGA is like, yeah, they're kind of annoying in the last 20 years. And I think to us, it's like, the same enemy, right, Donnie? Like, we know who we're talking about here. So I guess to go back to the Declaration of Independence, it was a statement of this is what our story is, and we're sticking to it. And if you run afoul of that story, we as independent sovereigns acting cooperatively are going to do something about it. And, they probably should have stopped there. But yeah, I guess it makes total sense to me, as you said, of why, Spooner would look at the Declaration and say, yeah, this is first principles codified in a agreed upon narrative. It doesn't need to be anything beyond a narrative because the narrative should be self-actualizing. And in my view, the narrative is necessary and powerful when it's codified that way. A Declaration of Independence like that.
Yourself.
Yeah.
It's not just about convincing other people. It's telling yourself a story, because we think about our own selves, our own lives in the context of our own story, because that comes out when you're talking with people. You tell stories of your life because that's how you think about your life, about in story form. And so it would be even worthwhile to write down like our own personal declarations of independence, so to speak, and tell the story of our era and our day, to have that down as a memento and memorializing in the same way that they did. Because I think those guys would have rebelled without that. But there's something important. I mean, Spooner even talks about this. There's something important in the writing down of things. You could argue that written language was developed for the purpose of recording contract. And and declaration of intent. So, yeah, I it's hard to be optimistic. I understand, and in some ways, it's kind of fake it till you make it. But I genuinely am fairly optimistic about the state that we're in. Not my state. I'm in Illinois. I mean, the
Massachusetts.
status.
So yeah.
The status. So the overall, like the narrative, where we are in the story, and all of that. And like I said, there's plenty of ways to find white pills. And at the end of the day, you still, as an individual, you got to walk up there and be John Hancock and write the biggest, boldest signature, and do that in ways that you can do that. Like, for him, it was simply just ink and a quill. And then obviously it ended up having consequences. The right thing is always the right thing to do. It just is sometimes more costly to do it. And there are plenty of ways available to us right now where we can start to disassociate from the system. We're not Boromir. Don't try to use the weapons of the enemy against it. Use truth, because like I mentioned, before the show, that one of the ways to figure out, what the enemy is like is to understand what the good is. And Spooner narrows down natural law to 3 simple natural rights. You have the right to be dealt with honestly. You have the right to not be harmed without cause, and you have the right to be paid what you're due, which then is your obligation to others. Because if someone owes that to you, you owe it to them, and that is distilled down and to live honestly. Truth. That's, if we're to unify over anything, it would be truth, because truth is self-actualizing, self-unifying. But that even if no one is with you, be the 300 Spartans, stand in the gap. Like, I'm going to make the right choice in my own life. That's why I don't vote, because I don't believe that is a weapon of the enemy.
It's a humiliation ritual too.
And it's all of the above. So is that going to have a massive consequence in the long run if I don't vote? Well, statistically, no. Morally, I have a clear conscience. And obviously everyone has to come to that on their own. So, I'm not sitting in judgment of people, because obviously people arrive at truth at different stages or whatever. But then, not to turn this into a G money, pitch, whatever. I think Bitcoin's a really big part of the puzzle.
Yes. If you're going on an actual level and a narrative level, but on an actual level, I really have come to believe that. And if there's some actual signal beyond the narrative we've discussed with the story of Donald Trump, man, the existence of the Bitcoin network and the Bitcoin layer, the fact that Trump is pushing that throttle down. If you don't think Trump is pushing that fiat throttle down in 2026, man, you just wait. He's telling you in every financial interview he can do, we are going warp speed on this fiat experiment. And it looks like there's another system sitting there, which, harkening back to the founding.
All political power, as it is called, rests on the matter of money, as Spooner says. Yep. So, okay, we have an opportunity to use not their money, not their distribution systems, not their transactional systems, and then plus all the other use cases that the Bitcoin network offers. That's a simple, easy way to unplug and plug into something else. And there's other ways too that's the part of Spooner talks about. It's important to him what the people means. And the people is not a corporate entity. People talk about the Constitution, creates this corporate entity, and it was the people as a corporate entity created it. But in the people existed before the contract, and the people is not some collective group; it's individuals, and it's just shorthand to say the people rather than list out millions of individuals. But on individual level, we are individually the people, and we just need to step into that power, find ways to project that power. And obviously there are things like Bitcoin and trial by juries and other, I just started that series, so I'm big on that. I'm pretty hopped up on it right now.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to you want to hang out for rants for a couple of minutes?
Sure.
And
yeah,
we'll do that. We'll hit the rants and the boosts. I'll end us with a little Lord of the Rings button. I'll play the outro, and then we'll get you guys over to Q After Hours with Brad, Alpha, and Josh. But Jonathan, this has been an awesome conversation. Mm-hmm. Thank you for joining. I know Chad has loved it. Guys, please hit the thumbs up button. It legitimately helps us. I saw Rumble featured us tonight. Shout out to the Rumble boys.
Yeah, I thought Chris says it theoretically helps us.
That's true. It is all theoretical. It could theoretically help us. It could help somebody in need. It could help systemites, as I've grown to call them. Let me hit. If you guys are watching this on replay and you want to shoot a boost over, do that. I will definitely have Jonathan back if he would like to come back at some point in the near future.
Like I said, I don't get to have there's so few people in my life that I can have conversations like this with, where I'm not being looked at like I've got 3 heads.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll reserve that my judgments for I'm very subtle about my judgments.
Yeah,
as people know. I have a boost here, so yeah, if you guys are watching on replay and you want to send a note over for next week, go to badlandsmedia.tv/boost. Watch Jonathan's show 8 p.m. on Sunday nights. Is it going to remain the No Treason podcast? Is that going to be that's going to
because the idea is that once I move away from Spooner stuff, there's always material I can always go back to. I'm going to be hitting on any topic that would be considered treasonous to the official narrative.
Yeah, it's the same macro topic. All right, Cap Treg 99 sent $20 over. A water softener is ion exchange, not reverse osmosis. The beads are cation resin and removes minerals, not chemicals. I'm just a dumb girl, but I know some guy stuff, and that's the guy stuff I know. Home stuff, a new show idea. Yeah, people corrected me. I thought that I was getting the fluoride out of my water with my water system, but apparently I'm not. I'm poisoned anyway. I've got a lot of stuff out of the system, but I did look at that note, and thank you for sending that. So I use
it's called Pure Effect filters. There's a brand that I use that they advertise that it takes the fluoride out of the water.
You Cratch sent $10 over. Thank you, Burning Bright, for all you do. Always appreciate your perspective and take on things. Been following you since early on. Thank you. Appreciate that very much. Rants, we got Tom Terrific sent $25 over to help pay the bills. Thank you, Tom. Rocky Top Apologist, great leaders are probably all somewhat paradoxical. I would agree with that. Real great leaders. Peyton Pooh, I could go deep on Jonathan's stuff. Bless you, Bright. You are blessed. Still can't get a street fight. Love Badlandia.
It's got to be a better way to say that.
Still can't get a street fight?
No, go deep on Jonathan's stuff.
yeah. I don't know what you mean by a street fight. Reberhart, $100. Must say, BB, this has been one of your best narratives. Jonathan and you bring a 7-course meal of very satisfying information to chew on. In my opinion, the best meal and discussion ever. Ever, Jonathan.
All right.
Thank you, Reber. Very, very generous. Really appreciate that. And whoever my guest is does get the split of the rants, guys. So Thank you as well. Take it up with accounting if you don't. Keith O'Higgins, I heard Rob Reiner and his wife just signed on to the new Knives Out franchise. That is mean. I did see people in chat saying apparently Rob Reiner and his wife were stabbed to death, which is horrible. But I don't have a lot to add to that topic.
It's hard not to laugh at Keith O'Higgins' approach to life, though.
Rocky Top Apologist, ditto to what Reberhart said, but my job site has been covered in snow for a week. So here's $5. Is this drafting? Drafting? Yeah. Trump, I think, is drafting off of the system.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. Tattooed Teacher, really enjoying the conversation. Thank you, Teach. Reberhart, hey, Rocky Top, nice. I'll add a $5 challenge. Tonight's well worth it. And then Rocky Top says, sends a $5 over. Says, well, shit, I'm drinking. So Vrooman sends 5 in. I'm in for the excellent convo. Thank you. Dak, our good friend and bright legionnaire, still the only bright legionnaire in my chat, sends $20 over. Here's 4 more, mine, and 3 for those that may not be able. Thank you, Dak. Rebel Nader, $10. Not because I like BB, but I do enjoy his content. Nice. Wouldn't have it any other way. Deborah Stars, find a copy of Lightning Over the Treasury Building. The Federal Reserve must go for us to be free. And yes, that eliminates the IRS too.
Although I made the statement when I was covering the borrowing and taxing regime that we focus on the Fed, but really that's kind of a red herring because what the Fed did was streamline a process that already existed.
The creation
in the
of
Constitution.
Money. Yep. Yeah, the creation of money is the problem. That's just the punching bag right now. Beth, $20. Spooner would have loved In-N-Out. Jonathan is representing Cali well. Thank you for the show, gentlemen. Never been to In-N-Out, I don't think.
Oh, man, it's the best hamburger ever.
Tamarack Flats caught the last hour. It was very good. Thanks, gentlemen. Thank you, Tamarackians. Always supporting us. 808 France. Here's 5 mahalo. Thank you. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Again, please hit the thumbs up button. last little parting thought I had here is returning to Boromir and let's give a little shine to Aragorn. I think one of the beautiful things about the ending there, the departure of Boromir, is that another bit of a paradox in Tolkien that I find beautiful. It is the departure of Boromir, the one who made all the mistakes. He was the greatest of men, but he was also the most corruptible at the same time. His fall directly energized Aragorn to accept his mandate and accept his calling and take it on. In one of the most beautiful moments in the Lord of the Rings movies, which many people besides super nerds know happens, is that when Boromir dies, Aragorn straps his vambraces to his own wrists with the White Tree of Gondor, which symbolizes hope and rebirth. And he wears them for the rest of the series. This was back at a time when movies didn't feel the need to explain everything to you. He just wears them for the rest of the series, embraces his destiny. And I think the cool thing about Aragorn, that the reason he's just become my guy the older I get, is it's not that he becomes the king and everything. It's not that he saves the world and all that. He just, from that moment, he does the next right thing to do. At every moment in The Lord of the Rings, he does the next right thing. And him wearing the White Tree of Gondor, I think, is a beautiful representation of him taking on the dream of Boromir and not even thinking that he's going to be able to accomplish it, but because it's the right thing. So there's beautiful stuff there. You should raise your kids on Tolkien if you don't raise them on the Bible. And I would say, I'm evidence of this. Tolkien can be a back door to that stuff.
Absolutely.
Because it's ultimate. If you have anything to add, you may.
Oh, I love all that stuff. I will say I've read the Lord of the Rings a couple times with my kids, and I read them a number of years ago, and then a few years later we were talking about something, and Bilbo comes up. My youngest is like, "Bilbo? Who's Bilbo?" And I was like,
so you got rid of that kid.
He's a hobbit. What's a hobbit? I was like, uh-oh. Like, okay, we need to go back. And so we started the series over again. Because it had been too young when we read it the first time. It didn't register. But yeah.
I'm overdue for a watch. Once the analogies start going rapid fire on the shows, I know I'm like, that's my soul's way of being like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Put the extended editions on.
My opinion is that the greatest line in all of literature is the line from Gandalf when he says, "So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All they have to decide is what to do with the time that is given them." And that is such a beautiful, that scene, Peter Jackson did such a beautiful job with that scene. But that quote,
and Ian McKellen.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
It's in the intro and the outro to this show. You guys will hear it on your way out.
It's our time. It's our time. So
he also has another bass line when he says, it's not quite as poetic, but when he says, "Be silent, keep your forked tongue behind your teeth. I did not pass through fire and death to bandy crude words with a witless worm." And that is the sort of war posture that Donald Trump took against the establishment. And that is exactly the posture that you should take on the establishment, even if that establishment is dressing themselves up as MAGA influencers.
Especially if they're dressing themselves up as MAGA influencers.
Great shit, Jonathan. I will see you next time. Indeed. And everybody check out Jonathan's show, No Treason Podcast, Badlands Media, Sunday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern. As I always say, guys, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly. See you next week.
Cheers.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Malone?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through. It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we will have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You fought bravely. You kept your honor. I do not know what strength is like that. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people failed. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.